Good morning, everyone. This is the Highways and Transport Cabinet panel this Thursday, 4th of November 2021, commencing at 10 a.m. I'm Phil Bibby, Executive Member for Highways, and I'd like to make an announcement first, please, as the chair of this meeting. The Council will be holding this meeting electronically. Members of the public may also attend this meeting in an electronic capacity, and there is a link on the Council's website for them to do so. Members of the Council are asked to keep their microphones switched off until called to speak and switch their microphones off once they have finished speaking. Cameras may be left on throughout the meeting if members wish. Cameras should be switched on if and when speaking in the meeting. To indicate a wish to speak, members should use the raise hand function. Use of the meeting chat function is exclusively for voting. At the end of the debate on each item of business, there will be a vote. Members should vote using the meeting chat function by indicating for, against or abstain. I will declare the result after each vote. Officers are present at the meeting and will follow the same protocols. Breaks of at least 15 minutes will be held every 2 hours. Other breaks will be incorporated as appropriate, and depending how long the meeting seems to be going on, I would plan to have lunch about 12:30-ish. Firstly, we've got no substitutions and no apologies. So I will now ask all the members to introduce themselves as listed in the order of business. First of all, James. James Bond.
Hi, I'm James Bond. I'm a county councillor. I am a borough councillor and a town councillor.
Thank you. Annie.
Good morning, Chair. Councillor Annie Brewster, Conservative Member for Harpenden Rural. Thank you.
Richard.
Hi, Richard Butler, represent Bournemouth South Division. Thanks.
Steve Cavender.
Yes, good morning, Chair. Good morning, panel members. My name is Steve Cavender, and I am the member for Tudor Meriden in Watford.
Paul.
Hopefully that's me. Paul Clark. I am the county councillor for the Hitchin South Division. Good morning.
Stephen. Morning, Stephen.
Morning, Chair. Stephen Giles, Medhurst, Liberal Democrat Group Leader and spokesperson on Highways, a member for Central Watford and Oxley. Thank you.
Jeff.
Good morning, all. Jeff Jones, Conservative Member for Buntingford.
Graham.
Good morning, Graham McAndrew, Member for Bishop Stortford Rural and Deputy Executive Member.
Rena.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Rena Ranger. I am the Conservative Member for Rickmansworth East and Oxley Park.
And Sarah.
Good morning. My name is Councillor Sarah Tullen, Councillor for London Colney within the St Albans.
I don't know, there's something wrong with your mic, Sarah. We just about heard you. We heard you, but you might need to turn it up for if you contribute any further. Thank you. Right. First item of the agenda proper is the minutes, and I invite panel to agree on the minutes of the meeting of the Highways and Transport Cabinet panel on the 14th of September 2021. Can you please vote in chat? Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, my chat function appears not to be working, but I do agree the minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Mine doesn't seem to be working properly, but I agree.
Okay, that's agreed. Thank you. And item 2, there's no public petitions. Item 3, response to motion on construction management plans. Stephen, if you'd just like to talk to your motion.
Chair?
Yes?
Can I check, did you ask for any declarable pecuniary interests?
Sorry, no, I didn't. Please declare any declarable or pecuniary interests. Sorry, I forgot all about that. I hear nothing. I'd say there's a nil return.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Stephen, would you like to talk to your motion?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the purpose of this motion is actually to draw members' attention, but also to try and assist the council and in fact the 1.2 million residents in Hertfordshire that suffer from, I have to say, over-eager developers. Now, I appreciate the council has some limited powers within this, i.e. the local planning authorities agree the planning permissions, and inevitably when they agree a planning development that goes right up to the highway boundary, inevitably that results in some of the highway being lost, either the footway, the road, or in some cases parking bays, pedestrian crossing, and indeed bus stops. All the latter I and my colleagues have experienced in recent years. However, I do feel we need to be pushing back a bit firmer with developers. I've come across a large number of instances where they have been over-eager in taking away footway. Given the climate change agenda and indeed our agenda for sustainability and encouraging cycling and walking, we need to push back on developers, and when we agree construction management plans, they should only be a minimum loss of any of the public highway for the minimum amount of time. And I'll give a couple of examples, if I may, Chairman, which I think highlights some of the issues here in my own area. There's been a recent hoarding put up King Street next to the town centre, part of the town centre. The hoarding is actually not a construction management plan issue. It's to put new windows in a building. However, the whole of the footway and a whole section of parking bays have been removed, even though there is a rear access to development and there's no need to have the hoardings at the front. But of course, because the licence being granted, that can't now be changed. And I think it needs to be pushed back on those sorts of examples. Another one was, again, hoarding and indeed removal of footway and parking bays in a local shopping area, which meant the local shops lost 5 on-road parking bays for 2.5 years, even though the developer didn't need to have the parking bays, but wanted to use them for storage of materials. Now, that to me is not right, and we need to be pushing back on this. Hence, I've suggested a number of recommendations here to officers, which has now been circulated to members, and I'll talk through those if it's helpful, Mr. Chairman, at this stage. In that we should be giving priority. The first one basically says officers should give utmost priority to pedestrians and cyclists and agreeing construction management plans. I accept on occasions we'll have to lose those, the use of pedestrian access, but where this is kept to the minimum in both length and absolute time. It's often the case that once we've been agreed these schemes, they are time limited, but often developers slip and then come back and ask for another 6, 9, or indeed in some cases 12 months. But what is very important to this is, in my view, and I've come across this on a number of occasions now, and to be fair, the development management team and the highways team have actually pushed back on occasions where actually all they've done is use the footway for storage of materials, not in accordance with the licence. And we should actually ensure, and my colleagues will speak about particularly one example, full pedestrian cycle accessible alternative routes are not only fully signed, but they are actually provided at the developer's cost and indeed protected. What often happens, and I'm sure most members will have seen this, is yes, occasionally, but not always, a drop ramp is provided on the curb so that they can cross to the other side of the road. Well, that's fine on a side road. It's not acceptable on a main A road. In one case, Chalk Hill, the main A road in and out of Bushy, they were suggested to cross 2 lanes of traffic with no pedestrian lights. That, in my view, is unacceptable, and the developer should have been made to pay for traffic lights. Secondly, clearly, the construction management plans have to be agreed by the county council. So I do believe it is right and only proper that us as our community champions should be told about these when they are submitted to the county council. The county member is informed, IX developer submitted this plan, and then the member is aware of what is going to happen. And that if any footway and road closures that require, especially those require hoardings, are notified to the divisional member and are included on the appropriate county accessible websites. Now, some of these, but not all of these, are on the OneNet site, and I looked through that last night and I found several missing on there that had been agreed. So that ensures the public are aware, but actually more importantly, I also found this on some of these, that they were down as Herts County Council having done the work and closed the road off, but in fact it wasn't our responsibility. And we need to be quite clear, and I'm sure you have it, Mr. Chairman, I'm sure other members get it. Why has the county closed the road off and no one ever works there? Well, actually it tends to be either affinity water, the gas or electric, and I think actually therefore the blame and responsibility should be pushed to them. Well, actually they've had to close it off for that. It's not the county council's fault. We had to give them that permission. And finally, I think this is one that we have raised before, and that where there are construction management plans, and I appreciate officers can't do this on all developments, but where there are construction management plans that involve highway closures or substantial excavation works, and that would be part of the construction management plan, that we should be undertaken before surveys and before photos to ensure any highway damage can successfully be reclaimed from the developer. No, it's just not acceptable that verges, pavements and highways are churned up by developers who make millions out of our development schemes, leave the site, and what happens, we end up having to fault report it, resurface the road, come along and actually say, well, we haven't got the evidence because we don't know what it looked like beforehand, and developer will claim, but it was like that anyway. We need to be much more proactive to reduce the cost burden on our council taxpayers. So that's the essence of what I'm proposing here as additional recommendations rather than what is just down here as note in the report, that officers can take these measures forward to better protect our 1.2 million residents, better protect the council taxpayers' funds, but also, more importantly, to encourage developers to make proper provision for pedestrians and cyclists in any future scheme. Now, a lot of this will have to be pushed back to the local planning authorities. Some may be more proactive about that than others. I would like to suggest although we can't force it, that when we have the discussions with local planning authorities on the planning applications, that it is clearly pointed out to the local planning authority that if the developer gets the permission to build right up to the highway boundary, there is going to be a consequential effect on the highway. And I think often that the local planners don't take this into account, I have to say, when they agree the plan permission, or don't push back and actually suggest, well, actually, wouldn't a 1.5 metre buffer strip between the boundary of the building and the highway with some planting be better, which in itself could be used as the hoarding area for that development. And I think we need to be, given the number of houses that we are required by central government to build in Hertfordshire, we need to push back on this, because it's all very well putting sustainable transport plans in, then find a road is blocked off or a footway is blocked off for 2 years. That just discourages residents and they push them back into their motor vehicles. I'll end at that, Chairman. Thank you.
You're on mute, Chairman.
Well, I don't know how that happened. Mark, you're going to come back on this one, I believe.
That's right. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, councillors.
Do you want to just give your report and then we'll go through these items specifically, cover them one by one? I don't think we're going to be asking to change policy on the hoof, but at least you can actually comment on these statements or requests. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just happy to talk through the paper that's in response to the motion that was put to council on the 20th of July this year. So in section 5, we've listed national and local policy that's relevant to construction management plans. But it's worth noting that unlike travel plans, construction management plans are not mentioned in the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework. So they're not a statutory planning document, but it is a tool. We see it as a tool that we can use to make sure that a developer has thought about how he's going to build out a development. So during this current growth agenda, we ask for, so we don't get it as a statutory document submitted on all planning applications. We probably only see it on less than 10% of the planning applications that we receive. And we request it where we have concerns about how a development's going to be built out, where we might have concerns about how that site is going to be serviced and the route that deliveries will take. So the report also goes through the 3 stages, points out the 3 stages that we deal with through development. So the planning stage is where we first initially ask for construction management plans. And in paragraph 410, we've pointed out or shown the template planning conditions that we have and we use on a regular basis when we're making recommendations to the local planning authorities. But nonetheless, even where we use those conditions, enforcement has proven difficult. And that's because it's outside the red line of the development. And it's essentially you have the option, particularly where we have mud on the road, to use highway enforcement, or we go to the LPA and ask for planning enforcement. And then through on a percentage of jobs, we get into the detailed design, where my teams would be looking at the technical approval of the detailed design through the Section 278 process, or network management would be considering a Section 50 application process for sewer connections, etc. Because let's not forget, developers do need to make all the utility connections to new sites, and therefore digging up the footway and the cycleways is unavoidable in a lot of cases. And then stage 3 is when the developer applies for road space and licenses, various licenses that we have, whether that be hoarding licenses, scaffold licenses, etc. And we've attached the hoarding license process as Appendix A to point out how that works. And due to the sustainability agenda at the moment, we're considering or we're doing the learning from Greater London, where they've recently introduced the direct vision standards for HGVs to improve the quality of the fleet. So where we do have an area of influence is to with our accredited contractor list that the developers use. So we have an accredited contractor list that we which are developed, sort of contractors we're happy to let on the network through road space bookings, and we're looking for them to, in their application to be an accredited contractor, tell us more about their fleet and give, so that we can check whether they've got low emissions HGVs with good direct vision standards. So they're like with the refuse trucks, you've probably seen they've got more glass, where you can see the cyclists on the near side, etc. So that's a quick run through of the paper. And I'm happy to take any questions, Chairman.
Shall I just sort of summarise these 4 points from Stephen? If you can just come back with brief comments, Mark, that'll help us. Number 1, officers give utmost priority to pedestrians and cyclists when agreeing construction management plans. We said we don't always agree with construction management plans, but what would you say about us making sure that we give priority to cyclists and walkers?
Okay, so with the planning applications, obviously the and many of you have been on planning committees, so you'll know that you're very much looking at the end result. So at the planning stage, you're very, the LPA's focus is very much on the end build, what the development's going to look like at the end of the job. And it's very rare for a development to be refused on the basis of the disruption caused during making that development. So therefore it's quite rare for us to refuse an application on the basis of our concerns about how you're going to build it. So, but we do use the construction management plan as a tool. So where we've got concerns about routing, etc., we will ask for it. And really under the obligations under health and safety generally and the CDM, construction design and management regulations, It shows that they've at least, they've thought about how they're going to build it, and it is a live document. So at the early stages, before a contractor is commissioned, generally it's very high level. It's not getting into exactly agreeing where a hoarding license will be, which footway they need closed, etc. It's high level. It's looking about the routing. They're going to agreeing a routing strategy, and programming to an extent, looking at beginning those negotiations with network management on when can they get onto our A roads or B roads, whatever, and particularly with diversion routes if they do need a road closure. But ultimately, safety is paramount. So in all our considerations, we are thinking about the safety of all highway users, and certainly, you must remember developers are still out there on the network delivering sites that were agreed under planning when we had LTP3. So it's going to take a little while to get all those LTP3 schemes built, and LTP4 schemes where this further consideration, particularly under priority one, policy 1, putting cyclists and walking first, higher up the agenda, and making sure that the needs of those road users is considered more fully.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I often get pushback from, well, why did we close the road down, or why did you just close the road down? Because it's the safety of the workers, pedestrians and cyclists. You can't have them working hand in hand, as it were. So it's often seems to be overkill, but it is for safety, isn't it?
All road users, yeah, indeed. And as Stephen was mentioning in his examples, there are cases where when it comes to agreeing a final license with network management, they're not only considering the risks of losing a footway and asking pedestrians to cross the road, but also the risks associated with that build. So, for example, particularly with high-rise buildings, and I'm sure you've all seen it, when you've got risks of items falling, you've got scaffolding, you've got overhangs, you've got balconies being built, etc. And developers need storage, room for storage and safe working. So often, if we do agree a hoarding to come out into the highway, it's not just considering the needs of the working highway and expeditious movement of traffic, but also looking at the safe operation of the site as well. We have to be reasonable in considering a developer's proposal.
Okay, thanks. Item 2, once construction management plans affecting the highway are submitted, the divisional county member is informed. What would you say to that one, Mark?
So ultimately, we're a statutory consultee, the Highway Authority.
Yeah. And
in the same way, town councils, parish councils, and councillors at all levels are consultees in a similar fashion.
Yeah.
We do, particularly with strategic development and developments that we feel that are going to be contentious. All our staff are briefed to give a county councillor a heads up on those developments. Yeah. There's also another method. Not only might you get notifications from your district council, but Stephen will know that we do have the facilities within our software to get an automatic notification of the Highway Authority being consulted, pushed out to your inbox. But I would put a warning on that we cannot be, it will be all or nothing with the system.
Yeah. Okay. Point 3, any footway and road closures and those that require hoardings are notified to the divisional member. Well, you've covered the hoarding situation, haven't you, while we do that? Yeah.
There's licensing processes within network management.
Yeah. Number 4, that the construction management plans involve highways, closure of substantial excavation works that before photos. Oh, this is basically before and after photos to pin the damage on a particular contractor or lorry driver. I mean, I know we're doing work on enforcement, but can you just explain what happens with damage caused by construction traffic now?
Indeed, there are parts of the Highways Act that we can use, but the difficult bit is proving it. If you go to court, I mean, hopefully most of them never get to court, we rely on a developer, we negotiate with the developer and rely on their goodwill to put things right. And we do that on a regular basis. But where they dispute it, or say it wasn't my trucks, it was the Amazon trucks going down the road or whatever, then often we need evidence. We have to have photographs and good evidence to be able to take that further to an enforcement case that's successful in court. But there is the condition where we have concerns. I mentioned the conditions, the 3 conditions that we've got in paragraph 410. One of those is where we request the LPA to condition the decision notice, asking that a condition survey is taken prior to them starting on site. And that can be submitted and logged and stored, ready for us to then do an after survey and can make a comparison and then agree who's going to repair what.
Because we did do an experimental trial, didn't we, in some area where we asked for local intelligence as to when developers go on site. Because whatever work we do, I mean, when the developers go on site, we don't always know about, do we? So we're asking for some sort of intelligence from districts and boroughs as to when development started, so that we could try and actually get some before and after evidence. How did that work?
It's mixed results because not all. So DM as a service, obviously we reply to nearly 5,000 planning applications a year, but the number where we actually get involved in highway works, so where the developer has to effectively do agreed highway works, is a very small percentage of that. And those ones we enter in a direct relationship with the developer, and he has obligations to notify us when he starts in any event and book road space. But I think the ones where we have problems are the ones where we don't enter into those Section 278 agreements. So where basement is being put in, a conversion or an extension, and they'll have loads of tradesmen's vehicles that are parking on the highway, causing damages to verges, etc. And we don't have that direct relationship with the developer, and he hasn't really had to notify us because he didn't have highway works, but nonetheless he's having a highway impact. So we have more success where they're proposing some highway works, whether it be a sewer connection or a Section 278, but the difficult ones are the smaller developments where they don't need to have that relationship with us, but nonetheless they're going to cause a lot of mess basically.
Thanks, Mark. Can I open it up for other questions and comments? Paul.
Get myself unmuted. Can I let Steve go first and then me?
You may.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Chair. It won't surprise you to know that I support the amendments that Councillor Giles Medhurst has suggested. Many of the examples that he raised in his speech, I've experienced them myself. And what I wanted to raise in particular was this issue around pedestrian crossings being closed as part of a development without providing an alternative. I've got a couple of issues in my division right now where pedestrian crossings have been closed in highly populated residential areas, close to a shopping parade, with nothing being provided as an alternative until, of course, I insisted upon it when something was done. So I really do think that we need to consider pedestrians in these areas where they're being developed and make sure that alternatives are provided. I also, if I may, I wanted to ask a question of Mark Youngman. I was very interested in the comments he was making about improvements to the quality of fleets out there. And he referred particularly to the direct vision system that London now use and other areas use at all. I'm interested to know whether in terms of trying to improve that in local developments, whether it's just a series of questions that they ask the developers, or whether in actual fact they insist on an accredited scheme, something like the Fleet Operators Recognition Scheme, where it takes into account all of those things and so much more.
Mark, would you want to come back? I mean, the first bit about pedestrian crossings, again, it goes back to the safety issue, but making sure that we provide reasonable alternatives, and also if you can answer the question about the line of sight, etc.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we don't close a pedestrian crossing lightly. Our network management teams, when they receive an application from a developer, they have to look that there's adequate signing, guarding, lighting, and alternative routes are available. Not only available, but well signed, and that there are, you know, safe routes available. So that consideration already goes on. And there may be, obviously, occasionally we do get works installed that hasn't been approved, and there we'd welcome, you know, we take a heads up on that, and we would send an officer, an inspector out to react to that, and obviously do some door knocking and start talking to the developer and saying, let's put this right and let's come up with a safer system of working.
Yeah, I mean, I take issue in part with that, Mark, only in as much as with one particular incident that I had when I insisted on there being a temporary crossing that was made available. So you'd have to ask the question, why couldn't that have been made available right from the very start of those works? So as I say, I take issue in part with that, but you know, I mean, we can't just take a pedestrian crossing out, particularly in a highly populated residential area, very close to a shopping parade, without making some kind of alternative arrangement.
Yeah, I wasn't involved in that exact case, so it's very hard for me to comment. But on the direct vision standards, they're, like I say, we are looking to London. Being a home county, we do feel that we're going to benefit from it. Not only do we have operators that go into London from Hertfordshire, so they'll naturally will get some benefits from them upgrading their fleet to be able to work in central London. But also we feel that we can have an influence over, via our accredited contractor list. So our accredited contractor list, they're the only contractors we allow to work for third parties on the network, and they have to renew membership every year. So they have to submit two things really: that they're a member of an agreed accredited contractor scheme, and that they have at least £10 million public liability insurance. But what we've added to that application form is that they submit their registration numbers of their HGVs, and then we can go to the it's the TfL website where you can punch in a registration, and it will tell you how many stars out of 5 that HGV's got. So quite quickly we can start putting a number of stars against that contractor, and hopefully one would hope that customers out there, third-party developers, would naturally be drawn to, you know, the contractors with 5 stars against their fleet as opposed to 1 or 2 stars. And then hopefully by doing that, contractors that work in Hertfordshire will naturally see the benefits. If they want to get more work, that they might want to upgrade their fleet to a fleet that has better emissions, that helps our air quality impacts then.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I genuinely support the direct vision scheme. I think it's a very well constructed scheme. But I think the point I was trying to make was, and I'm sorry if I didn't make it well enough, but the point I was trying to make was you can go much further than that and improve the quality of fleets and drivers out there by asking your contractors to be FORS accredited to the Fleet Operators Recognition Scheme. That's not just about vehicles, that's about the quality of drivers, how well they're trained, how well they operate their vehicles, etc. And I, for one, would certainly, if that's not already included in your deliberations, I, for one, would certainly like to ask you to consider that is also included for on your constructors list.
And it starts with our own fleet as well, doesn't it? I know,
of course,
through
absolutely.
the sustainability action plan, we're looking at obviously Ringway's fleet, because for us to influence third-party contractors, we've got to show that we've got to be leading from the front, haven't we?
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, you could say it's morally wrong if you're asking your contractors to be part of a scheme like that, but you're not prepared to be part of a scheme like that yourself. So, but I press you on that point. I think being part of an accredited scheme is something that really should be considered.
The schemes that we look at the moment are more about sort of neighbourhood contractors, contractors that are good neighbours. So less about operating licenses of HGVs, but about being neighbourly contractors and developers. And I'm sure you've seen the placards put on the hoardings. So there's a couple of schemes there that we're happy, and it's more than just the HGVs. It's about them doing neighbourhood engagement and reacting, having an open door to the community and being involved in that community engagement, and sometimes even then giving back through charity events or whatever.
Okay, so I understand that, but there's and I support that, but there's no point having a system whereby you accredit people for being neighbourly when they're not operating a safe fleet. And these accredited schemes, that's what they are intended to do. They are intended to make sure that contractors operate a safe fleet. I'll give up there now because I've taken up quite a lot of this time already, but I'm quite happy outside of here to forward on to you some information about some of these schemes that you might want to consider.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. My concern is letting the local members know there is a problem. Realise it's not everyone. The carriageway management plan doesn't come out until after the plan has been approved by the local LPA. So because there's still things going on, and trouble doesn't occur, as all councillors will know, until there's a problem, which is further down and the things start going out. Whilst I know we haven't got the resources to be able to inform, physically inform every member, is there a way, an automated way, which I'll ask Mr. Youngman, of being able to say to members, if you go here, here's all the CMPs we've got in place, this is the current state. So when a member gets questioned by a member of the public, why are you doing this, and you can go and find out, or perhaps notification once it's agreed, because it's agreed after the planning thing, so it's letting people know. Because the other thing, we've talked a lot about the use of the highway. Some of the damage is to the commercial viability of our town centres across the county, because where you start closing parking and stopping people getting to the shops, safety, I understand, fully support, but the commercial viability is a problem when you start closing off parking thing for 2 or 3 years, and it hurts the town centre. There's also the question of enforcement in residential areas. It starts off with saying, oh yeah, we've only got light trucks, but then you start putting HGVs down there. That may well be the local planning authority, and I'm happy to take that away and follow that up with another hat on. And the last point I wanted to make is there's a condition I understood that has been used in the past where the developer is responsible for making good the area that they've developed, back to the same standard. Why cannot we not put that on as a standard condition to say the developer is responsible, whilst they may not say it's not their responsibility? It wasn't my truck, it was Amazon. I think Mark used the example of the developer. They're the ones making the money. It should not be the taxpayer that picking up the cost to make good. If we put that condition on to say the developer is responsible for making the verges good where they park on the verges afterwards, should that not be a standard condition? They're my quick 4 points.
I quite agree with the last point, Paul, but I would say it's the LPAs that give this, lay down the conditions, not us. We are just consultees. But Mark, can you come back on that? You did say there's a facility for members to be advised of what's happening, but on an all or nothing basis, didn't you?
But not on construction management plans.
Well, that would be a notification that the Highway Authority is being consulted on a planning application in your district.
Yeah.
So it's quite a lot of emails. But what Paul first mentioned there was about storage. Where do we store the CMPs? So we don't hold them centrally, and that's because we don't want to really duplicate, because they are all held on the LPA planning access portals. So anyone that has any status would go on the, so particularly if it was trying to sign off one of the template conditions we have, it would go on the planning portal and go out for consultation for 21 days. Well, 28 days, but you know, we get 21 days to comment. And so they are on the portal, but you have to be careful that once you go back on an older development, so once it's active, when you look back on the planning portal for that particular site, you might have 3 submissions of that CMP before you got to one that was approved. So, you know, it'll be a release a condition application, discharge a condition application, and uploaded generally would be a letter and the actual document for consultation. And then you get various consultation comments. They generally don't attract that many comments from the general public. And once approved, there'll be a decision notice from the LPA uploaded to the same application number. So that's where they're stored, and we can obviously help members find those.
Okay.
Could I, Phil,
with
your indulgence? Yeah, it's find out once they're finally approved, because there's a long process. I mean, all planning applications, you know, do take a considerable time. I am the executive member for planning at North Hart, so I have some painful experience of various bits and pieces. But it's the final sign off. Is there no way, an automated way? Because I realise, you know, with staff, you've only got, you know, a certain amount of time, because we're able to, you know, when a planning application comes in, we're told about it, but it's the sign off that it's actually going ahead, because I'm conscious that there's a lot of negotiation takes place, you know, getting to the final thing, which is what I'm trying to, you know, protect members from, because we don't want, you know, everything, you know, down. But the final notice, once it's agreed, is there no automated way of saying to a member in your division, this has been agreed? Then you can store it, and you know, if something goes wrong, you've got a chance.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So the only ones you wouldn't see is where we get a confidential pre-app request. So where we get asked for pre-app advice on, you know, before they go through the bother of submitting a true planning application, they might want to submit it to us for an opinion first. We do that under pre-app. Those ones you wouldn't see, but all the ones that are subject to a consultation from the local planning authority, they're uploaded to the website. So really, and Phil's right, I think it would be dangerous for me to get the team to give you a heads up when we've returned a positive response to the LPA, because that's not a foregone conclusion at that point. The LPA could decide to take a different opinion and not discharge that condition. So ultimately, you would really need the district council to give you that notification of where they've signed off a CMP. Because sometimes we might reply positively, but 100 residents might object. And for that reason, the LPA might not release it.
Thanks, Graham.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of points. When a developer moves in, I take it that he's responsible, or they're responsible for safe access and egress to the site, and they would obviously carry out risk assessments, and failure to do that, it would then go through the appropriate channels. And there seems to be a slight confusion here about what County Council's responsible for, planning, and what the local planning authority is responsible for. And I do get notifications from my local planning authority about a planning application that's been submitted. And if I've got any concerns over that planning application, I then log on to the planning portal. Then I see the reports that come from Highways, Environmental Services, etc., Wildlife Trust. And I think there's a plethora of information already there. And what we don't want to be doing is reinventing the wheel that actually works. That's me.
Okay, thank you. No more hands up, Mark, but if I can put you on the spot maybe and help us. Of the 4 items listed by Stephen, is there anything in there that you feel that we could do better or differently, or anything that we need to have another look at?
In all honesty, I think we're on the path to considering, well, as you know, we're rewriting Roads in Herts.
Yeah.
Our current design standard. So we're well on the route there. So we're influencing change within that document.
Yeah.
We're also, you know, sort of reviewing LTP4. But in the planning world, we're still trying. You know, we're still still delivering LTP3 schemes on the ground. Yeah. But we're still pushing the boundaries on really getting more cycle infrastructure. Yeah. And wider routes now since the advent of a new cycle design standard. Yeah. So we're really pushing the boundaries. We're in a period of change. Okay. A new MPPF that gives us new requirements to consider trees on all new streets, for example. Yeah. So a lot of this is naturally happening in any event. And now we've got the sustainability action plan that is causing us to really think about active travel. Okay. And introduce that on more developments. Okay.
Is there anything we need to consider when going through any of these reviews? Roads in Herts, LTP5, we'll talk about later. Sustainability. Is there anything that we could take forward to look at?
I don't think so. I think we're honestly on that journey anyway.
Okay. Fine.
I suppose on the national stage, CMPs could get more mention, more acceptance, like travel plans have become.
Okay, thank you. Is Graham a legacy hand?
Sorry, that's a legacy.
Okay, Stephen then.
Well, I'd say express some disappointment with the response, I'm afraid, from Mark and others, particularly one aspect that hasn't been addressed, and I think you skirted over, Chairman, was in relation to hoardings. There is no provision anywhere for hoarding licences to be notified to local members, irrespective of a construction management plan, because you don't need a construction management plan for a hoarding licence. Hoardings can go up for other reasons. Indeed, I gave the example where, in fact, it wasn't a construction management plan. It was a refurbishment of an office building with windows, with new double glazed windows going in, and hoarding license was given. The first I knew about it was when I walked around the street corner and found there was no pavement and no signs indicating the pavement was closed, until I got onto the network management team, who then had to send someone down, get the signage put up, the hoarding was in the wrong place, and so on. It seems to me we are still very reactive. Now, if officers are saying that they do take cognizance of item 1 in terms of what I'm proposing here, then paragraphs 510 and 511 of the report might have been rather better worded. 511 doesn't mention pedestrians at all. It says the network management team will consider traffic on the street. Sorry, what about pedestrians?
I think pedestrians are traffic, Stephen.
They're not traffic on the street in that sense, and I would suggest, Mr. Chairman. And Councillor Cavender and myself have given examples where footways have been closed off and no alternative provision has been provided. And I'm sorry, if officers are saying it's all hunky-dory, the examples and experiences I have given to them over the last 3 years, hence the motion to council, shows it is not all hunky-dory. And if you speak to residents, particularly in urban areas which are subject of large amount of development, some of it is very unacceptable. Now, if you're saying it's all hunky-dory, then you'll have no problems agreeing that actually one is already being done and therefore can be agreed. Now, and what we're not talking about are plan applications. Now, Mark mentioned very clearly, and yes, there is a process in place for plan applications. The construction management plan is an addition to the plan application and can follow, potentially up to 3 years later after a plan application has been agreed. And obviously, to some extent, that is subject to whether or not the local planning authority has put the standard condition 13 on. And indeed, most of them are standard condition 14. In fact, most of them never seem to put condition 14 on, wear and tear on the highway. So that can be down the line. Now, I do appreciate, certainly in my case, I am informed and kept closely in touch with a couple of officers who do inform me about substantial developments in my county division. And I appreciate that. And I can get involved and discuss with them alternatives, and they themselves can push back. But what I am concerned about is that this approach is very much reactive, and we should be pushing back. We now have, through the Hearts Growth Board, a developers forum, and we should be saying actually to developers, actually, you need to take some responsibility on this in terms of the latter point I made here about potential damage to the highway as part and parcel of what you're doing. And that's a conversation. It's not necessarily changing policies. It is a conversation. Hence the reason for point 4 that we should be pushing back on that and not just accepting what goes on. I accept getting the evidence down in terms of written evidence, and I've provided some of that, and indeed photographs in the case of at least one scheme. And officers said, well, it wasn't sufficient. We can't actually prove that it was that vehicle, even though it was quite, the tyre marks were quite clear. But let's not get boiled down with the planning applications. It's a question now of ensuring accessibility of these sites. Now, if you're saying everything is hunky-dory, I have to say I don't agree. But then in that case, you don't have any disagreement with item 1 because you're already doing that. I accept that what you're saying, you can't do a bespoke system, but actually officers are saying a very minority of the planning applications require a construction management plan. So it's a very minority of them. I think the figure was quoted like 20 or so. Then I can't see why those can't be informed that you've signed those off to the local member. I really struggle to understand why that can't be done through our HLOs, that they are aware, because surely we should be the first point of contact for local residents when these things occur. But there is certainly a gap, and I've looked through what it says about the hoarding licence. It doesn't say anything on the hoarding licences where that goes onto the systems that anyone can actually find the hoarding licences have been agreed. So unless Mark or others can point out there is actually already a site that I can access and other members can access, we do already have a deficiency on the hoarding licences. So I don't know if Mark wants to come back specifically on that one point, but I can't find in the appendix there where it says it's registered on a certain site and I can go and check who's got a hoarding licence, irrespective of the construction management plan. Now, I may have missed it in rereading this, but I can't see that in the appendix.
Mark, hoarding licences.
Yes. So when I spoke about hoarding licences, it's also worth mentioning that then sometimes they're done under a footway closure as well. So if we think of the former pub just down from County Hall, that hoarding that's covering the footway, you won't find a hoarding licence for that because that was done under a footway closure. So, and when we have a closure of any part of the highway, that would be on one net.
Right.
So, if it's the stronger of the two, and it's a closure, you should see those, or anybody, member of the public, can see them on one.net. We do work in close collaboration with network management. We have to, and obviously that's to make sure that when a developer applies for road space, they would want to check that there's a section 278 in place, for example, and we also consult network management on the best routing because they manage the network. So we talk about the best routing and what's the best way of building out a site, and would a closure be acceptable, etc. Particularly with December embargoes approaching, we have to sometimes talk about whether we look to move works into next year, for example. But as it's not really my area, if Steve Johnson's available, as the roads manager, he manages the whole licensing for the service. So if it's appropriate, I'd like to defer to Steve Johnson.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Chair. Morning, panel. So yes, just in terms of hoarding licenses, they should be on one network. There may be occasions when a hoarding license isn't on one network, and that may be because a license hasn't actually been granted. I can't comment on individual sites, but if members are aware of any sites, by all means let me know, and we will go away and investigate those. If the hoarding license, or if the hoarding is in place under a footway closure, the footway closure would also be on one network. And we can provide guidance to members on how they can set up one network if they have an account, so that they can be sent automated alerts through the system as to when a license is granted. Just in terms of granting hoarding licenses, the team clearly need to strike a balance with any development going on, particularly those that go all the way up to the highway boundary. There's normally a requirement from the developer to have some space to allow their development to be constructed safely. And normally that space comes by, we have to reallocate space from the highway, which can mean closing a footway. And it should be standard practice that where we are closing a footway, there is a requirement that suitable, safe alternatives should be provided. Now, that may be in the case of crossing points, or sometimes we end up closing carriageway lanes so pedestrians can go into the carriageway. But there is a requirement that the minimum footway width should be 1.2 metres. Again, there may be locations where that is not happening, and if that's the case, I'm more than happy for people to let me know and we can take those up.
Want to come back, Stephen?
Yeah, just briefly, rather than dwell on this, I know you've got other items on the agenda, Mr. Chairman, but I've come across an example where a hoarding license has been given and no alternative route for pedestrians being provided. That's different from a construction management plan where you would look at alternative routes, even if they are not satisfactory. But hoarding license, we seem to have a little bit of a gap here. And the officer accepted that there shouldn't be an alternative route provided on a one-way street.
I think if you could send that examples through, Stephen, I'm more than happy to take that up and investigate that with the team.
The other point, I'm looking on OneNet as I did last night. The OneNet system seems to imply the hoarding licenses and the works are the responsibility of the county council, or the licenses, but the works, of course, are not the responsibility of the county council. So I checked a number of these, and they're all down responsible body, Herts County Council. It's not. It's Affinity Water, it's the developer, and so on. So the system isn't quite as accurate as it could be, which was one of the points I was making, Mr. Chairman, that actually, when we're having public information, it needs to be the appropriate body that gets the blame or responsibility for these works.
And can I just clarify that point? Because developers aren't statutory bodies, statutory undertakers, we are the ones who are granting the licence. It does appear in our name as Hertfordshire County Council. That unfortunately, I agree. That's unfortunately the way the national system is set up. Where it's a utility, it will be the utility's name because they are a statutory body.
Okay. Can I just take a few things away from the discussion just now? If we can take away as an action, Teresa and co, the one network instructions to members, that might be useful so they know how to use it and get the information. I would say I don't think anyone's saying, Stephen, that it's all hunky-dory, because let's face it, when you're working between DM, Herts County Council, LPAs and developers, things don't always go as smooth as we would like, and things do happen. I've been involved in developments that have gone wrong and creating all sorts of problems, and it's a devil's mess to actually sort them all out. But we do have sufficient guidance to cover what should be done, We do give sufficient instructions and guidance to LPAs, etc., and we enforce where we can, and that's not always an easy issue, unfortunately. But I mean, I think from Mark saying your items 1 to 4 and the motion as a whole, there's nothing that we feel we can add to what we're doing now, although we will always bear in mind in any guidance we issue in LTP5 discussions, developments, we make sure that our roads are kept safe and operational, and we are given priority wherever possible to walkers and cyclists. So that's all I can really say on that.
In that case, Mr. Chairman, what I would like to suggest, because I accept you won't agree to items 2, 3 and 4, but number 1, you're saying actually effectively you are doing, and I would like a separate vote on number 1, which is basically, you know, that we should be giving, and officers are saying they are giving utmost priority to pedestrians. I want to reinforce that in the public domain, that the intention of the council will be as priority to pedestrians and cyclists wherever possible, not always the case, and alternatives on fully signposted, protected and provided routes at the developer's cost are part and parcel of the ethos of this authority. So I'd like a separate vote on 1. I would hope you wouldn't disagree with item 1, because officers seem to be saying that's what they are doing. Yeah. You're saying, well, that's what we're trying to do. I accept you don't agree with items 2, 3 and 4, but I still like a vote on that. But I move a separate vote on item 1, Mr. Chairman.
I would be agreeable to including in the recommendation which says the panel is advised to note the contents of the report and we ask officers to continue giving utmost priority to pedestrians and cyclists in any construction management plans.
Phil, can you...
and they should provide and any removal of highway access should provide a full pedestrian cycle accessible alternative route, signposted, protected and provided by the developer, because that's what we normally ask for in these, don't we? I think that's what we do anyway, Stephen. I don't think we need to spread it out. We just say we'll give priority to walks and cyclists. Teresa, you wanted to come in there?
Can you clarify?
Yeah.
What we're going to be voting on. This has got slightly confused now because we've got 4 different possible recommendations. Stephen's asking for 2 separate votes, one on recommendation 1 and another vote on the other 3 together. And are you asking for a change to the actual recommendations as per the report?
What we can do, Teresa, with your agreement, is vote on the proposed amendment as a whole, or recommendation as a whole. Which
1, 2, 3 and 4. Is that correct?
1, 2, 3 and 4, yes. And then we will vote on the revised recommendation as I'm suggesting.
You'll have to read that out to me after the first.
I will do, yeah.
No, I've moved a separate vote on item 1, Mr. Chairman. It's my amendment to move. I'm entitled to move a separate vote on these items.
Okay.
So, Stephen, can I just check that the amendment 1 will be that officers give utmost priority to pedestrians and cyclists in agreeing any construction management plans that remove.
Correct. That's correct, Teresa.
And then there was the second paragraph, any such removal of highways.
Yes, that's part of item 1 before we get to number 2. Yeah. I'd like a separate vote on item 1, most clearly, Mr. Chairman.
Amendment. Let me just amend something, please.
Okay.
Okay. Amendment 1. She's okay. And if I do. So the recommendation 1 is now in the chat if people would like to vote on it.
Okay, thank you.
J Bond 4.
Recommendation 1 has fallen.
Okay. So we need to vote on 2, 3 and 4, Teresa.
That's correct. I'll put the information in the chat.
Yeah.
It's in the chat now. Councillor Bond, are you for or against the recommendation?
Apologies against.
Okay, right. My proposed amendments to the recommendations 3.1 to remain as is. And if I just read this out slowly for you, Teresa, a new 3.2. Officers are asked to continue giving utmost priority to pedestrians and cyclists when agreeing construction management plans. Have you got that, Teresa?
I've written it down, but I'm not going to type it in the chat box because it'll come out in gobbledygook. So
I think everyone knows what we're saying. So if we can vote, please, the recommendations as amended. Thank you.
Or James.
That's unanimous. Thank you very much, everyone. We go on to item 4, Integrated Transport Unit update. Alice and Andrew are billed. I don't know who's going to lead and whatever. Obviously, Andrew. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Yes, Alice Battler is also on the call, the Project Manager Officer for Hearts Links. Sorry if this item is slightly mislabeled. It is more of a focus on the Hearts Links demand responsive service that we launched in September. I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to get a couple of key stats up on screen to show you quickly. As we appreciate when the paper was submitted, some of the stats are a little out of date now, as time has moved on somewhat. Can I just check, Chair, you can see that on your screen?
Yeah.
I'll just make it bigger now. So again, thank you, everyone. We wanted to show you some key up-to-date stats on the service. As we appreciated, those included in the information paper are now a little out of date. Generally, the granularity of data from Hearts Links has been fantastic compared to a traditional bus service and allowed officers closer oversight over the service since launch. This first table here shows an overview of the key statistics of trips booked, account registrations and trip searches. As you can see, there's been a gradual upward trend in total trips with a slight dip in half term, which has allowed us to get very close to our forecasted weekly day average of 63 passengers already. It should be noted that a promotional code was offered to all first-time app users for a free single trip. Furthermore, you'll see the difference here between completed passenger trips and number of paid passenger trips. That's reflected of concessionary pass holders using the service, as their travel is free at the point of use, but is then calculated through our regular reimbursement process. Officers are still working through all the data related to revenue, and we should hopefully have conclusions on that in the near future. The next table shows use by day of week. As expected, weekdays are the days of most use. However, it is fantastic to see the level of use on Saturdays, reflecting potential leisure travel. Officers are now starting to analyse key opportunities for times where the service is not fully utilised to grow patronage. As shown in this map, the key trends of travel on Hearts Links are going into the key hub towns, especially Stevenage, Bishop Stortford and Royston, aligning with the project outcomes of improving rural accessibility to employment, education, healthcare and shopping. One of the primary aims of Hearts Links is to improve access from the east of the county to the west, where previously little public transport was available for residents. It is evident that this aim is already being achieved after only 6 weeks of operation. Following feedback from residents within the service zone, additional virtual bus stop locations are currently being reviewed with an aim to be implemented by mid-November 2021. This will further increase accessibility to the service in rural areas. And the final aspect of the data we wanted to show, which we get now regularly, is how passengers are rating the service. Passengers using the app are able to rate the service from a low of 1 to a high of 5 after each journey. As shown in this graph, the vast majority of service ratings on Hearts Links are 5, which is great. Whilst there have been a small number of service ratings under 3, these are quite proportionate to the number of ratings given. It's not mandatory for a passenger to rate their journey on the app. Similarly, passengers who book via the call centre do not have a platform at the moment to rate their experience. However, the quick, effective rating feedback has enabled officers to work with our technology provider and operator to quickly ascertain issues and put in place interventions. For example, an issue was identified in the algorithm as not enough time was allocated for the vehicle to get to sequential pickup destinations. So that's been mitigated by an increase of 15% for trip duration times in order to compensate for local traffic and real-time distances between pickup points. So that was just a really quick overview of the key stats we've had on the service in the first 6 weeks. Alice and I are happy now to obviously take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Andrew. So have we got anyone looking with their hand up? Graham.
Yeah, Andrew, it looks as though it's been a very successful launch, and just want to say thank you to all the staff who sort of were involved in the lead up and the delivery of the project, and wish you every success in the future.
Thank you, Councillor, much appreciated.
Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Yeah, Andrew, very good to see these figures. To me, they look excellent. Is this better than you envisaged? Yeah, so good to see that. I do wonder, though, what effect it might have the success of this of DRT against public buses. I don't know if there's any sort of data or any feedback coming from public bus operators, whether if you like, you're taking trade away from them. Be interested to know if anything has been felt. The only other point, I do get locally, I get excellent feedback on HeartsLinks. The only problems that I've been having, people have been contacting me about contacting the telephone line. In terms of the app, yeah, it works brilliantly. But I've got a lot of residents in my area that have had difficulty getting through on the phone line to try and one, book a trip, and to register their bus pass, etc. And that seems to have been a bit of a problem. Is that something that you're going to address going forward? So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Yeah, I think on your first point about modal shift, we are obviously more hopeful that the modal shift will occur from cars. Obviously, that's the main aim of the scheme. And we are still doing work with local operators to see if it has affected patronage on other routes. We also have some contracted routes in that area, which we are going to review in the near future. Obviously, we put in HeartsLinks to complement and build on the existing services, but we need to carefully look at that data. So, yeah, it's a very good point. I think on the phone line, as you probably recall, when I presented in July up to this panel, the phone line was a key thing we set up for those residents who maybe weren't as comfortable using technology. There was one graph I didn't quite show, shows that the phone line bookings have been relatively small compared to the app bookings and website, which is useful. But I know, and I'm happy to bring in Alice at this point, because I think Alice has been doing a little bit of work with our operator Uno to improve the phone line after the first few weeks. Alice, if that's a good point to mention the work you've been doing.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Yes, Jeff, we have been working very closely with Uno on this. I think one of the key issues identified was that there wasn't an expectation for the number of calls that we are actually receiving. And also the phone line has been used as a channel for communication for all issues or comments on HeartsLinks rather than just bookings. So one thing we've done to mitigate this is create a unique email account. So passengers can actually email in with questions about concessionary passes and other issues rather than using the dedicated booking phone line as well.
So how's that, Alice? How's that publicised? That email address then, because I'm not aware of that one.
Yeah, so that's it's been put on the Interlink website, and we've also just gone through a process of adding it to all of the automatic emails that the passengers are receiving. So that's been changed now through the technology company, and we are working on creating more leaflets, updated leaflets, which will be circulated, within the next couple of months, and that will have that information on there as well. But I'm happy to give that email address to you, Jeff, and you can pass that around if necessary.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And congratulations on the success so far.
Thanks, Councillor.
Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, this is a very good start. Successful bid to DfT for the money. Demand-led transport, I think, is one of the way forward. It's something that's been done also in Watford. Now, we'll have a similar scheme in Three Rivers. It's certainly in the rural areas to enable people to out of their vehicles. This is certainly the way forward, and thankfully it's been recognised by the DfT, and clearly this is a very good start to the project and needs to be encouraged. But going forward, I suppose, hence the amendments to the recommendation, which reflects on paragraph 4.5, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, there are 3 minibuses at the moment. They're diesel Mercedes Sprinters. The intention, that we did raise this at a briefing meeting, intention obviously to purchase some more. Given our sustainability agenda, hence the tabled amendment here, in that going forward, these either need to be hybrid plug-ins, full EVs, or alternative fuel vehicles. I've looked up online, and certainly there are Mercedes hybrids available of this nature. My son, who's a motor technician, but not in this area, elsewhere, works on these sort of vehicles. They are very reliable. And indeed, if you run a plug-in hybrid, actually, you can get the fuel economies well up well up because of the nature of the type of vehicle. So I don't know where it's not clear from 4.5. And if it's already the case that the ones purchased in June are going to be plug-in hybrids or full EVs, then I can remove the amendment. But I think the intention should be that we must move that way in terms of our sustainability agenda and the climate change objectives.
I must admit, when we were first talking about this, I said, why couldn't we have electric? Because that was the obvious answer.
Yeah.
And there were good financial reasons why not. But I know that we were considering looking to electric in the future, but I don't know what the update is on that, Andrew.
So actually, Chairman, through you, if I may.
Yeah.
Firstly, Andrew, Alice and I would completely agree with the motion in terms of the theory of switching to EV or green technology as soon as we can. What we can't do, though, is guarantee that's going to be the next vehicles. To be honest, we've ordered one already. That's on order because of the lead-in times, and that's another Euro 6 diesel. Alice and the team are absolutely working on this. The current range for these kind of vehicles, I'm not talking about plug-in hybrids, I'm talking about full EVs, is about 140, 160 miles. So pretty limited, and on a cold winter day, those that have got electric vehicles know they'll be lucky to get 100 miles out of that. So we're having to look at charging points in the area, which we're doing. Even for a plug-in hybrid, that would be a special charging point. You can't use a car charger networks that may be around. So we are looking at all that. It requires some infrastructure. They are costly, but completely agree that we need to move that way, and we will as soon as practical. The other thing we will do is also look at using biodiesel instead of normal diesel in those existing vehicles. But completely agree, we need to move that way. Just can't say we're going to do it by June or for the next vehicles we order.
Okay, thank you. Annie.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm delighted to see this. Congratulations, and the bus service improvement plan that we've also got on the agenda today. So thank you, Andrew and everyone. Always fascinated to see who's actually using the buses, and the more you give us, the clearer the picture is. And I was really quite interested to see the 25% of younger educated people who that don't have cars. It was quite interesting to see whether you split it by age. So that's one question, whether you've got any data on age. And also later on, you're telling us about there's a very high response to premium additions, the free Wi-Fi, leather seats and those sorts of things. So it's interesting to see what the demographic are using this between leisure and work. Because if we go on to the, which we'll probably talk about later, but just to mention now, the Herts and Essex Rapid Transit concept with looking to have the first and the last mile to help improve walking and cycling. Are we expecting, I mean, there are going to be some people travelling to work that will they take their bikes with them, or will there be some sort of bike hub at each of these stop-offs, as it were, or can they go on the bike? Because there's going to be an awful lot of people that can't go on a bike, and I'm just wondering, it seems like a perfect marriage to have these little shuttles, electric by then, hopefully, from each of the satellites. So there's cycling, but there's also this opportunity. And I don't know if that's planned. It's not mentioned at all in the Herts and Essex Rapid Transport section within the bus service improvement plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brewster. Yeah, I think to take that second point first, I think not to spoil surprise too much of the next agenda item in the BSIP, but definitely we see demand responsive transport as a really key future strand of the bus network. I think it's obviously early discussion with HART, and we are linked in with officers who are developing HART and the plans to see what feasible options there are for the future in terms of the bus model. But we definitely see HART's Links as a strong brand to continue and expand across the county, which I'll talk a little bit about on your next agenda item as well. So yeah, definitely take that point and agree. I think just on the terms of split by age, I have to double check with Alice here. I think obviously we can take out the concessionary quite clearly, and that indicates a certain level of age. Obviously, I'm not sure, Alice, if we have a full breakdown on other ages from the data at the moment, do we?
So we don't have any data on specific ages, but what we do have is data on how many times a saver card is used. So obviously you'll be able to picture from that the younger generation using the service. So at the moment I can say we've had 289 uses of the saver card and 180 uses of concessionary card. So the remaining journeys would have been from anybody who doesn't have either of those.
Okay, just think it will just be very interesting feedback if we are able to get a bigger picture, particularly in rural areas. I mean, we all assume it's people a lot of older people who don't drive, but it'll be very interesting to see whether that's the case or whether it's an awful lot of young people. Thank you.
Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two things I wanted to go on. One, when I went to the road shows and there was talk about using school transport, using it for school transport. Do we have the figures whether it's been used for any of that? The second thing is on the bus itself. What hybrid, whether it's plug charge or normal hybrid, where the vehicle itself generates the electric power. Why haven't we considered that? Because I understand those first 3 buses we've purchased outright, so that we've got an asset. And is that the case in the 4th bus case? Because what we're doing there is adding to the environmental impact with the diesel gas guzzlers, and that is a concern. That is why hybrid would reduce that. I've seen adverts for Merck's Sprinter vans going on electric, and I'm aware DPD have got their zero vehicles flying around delivering parcels. Do understand the infrastructure problems, but that's where hybrid gets over that, and I just wondered where that had been considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I think just on the first point around school transport, I think there were 2 considerations there. Obviously, as Alice just mentioned, around saver card users, which indicates a fair amount of college students and school children using the service, that they gradually use the service in those areas, and we'll keep an eye on that obviously and see what the data shows. I think the other thing we were looking to do probably in year 2 is start to look to see if we could blend some of the public facing travel with our existing school and adult care services contracts, where we could maybe bring some of those things onto the service where feasible. And we still need to sort of look at logistics of doing that. We are keen to try and see where we can integrate that into sort of those community needs as much as possible. But those are probably the 2 strands we're looking at the moment in terms of school transport, taking that forward, and hopefully we'll have an update on that in the next few months. In terms of the vehicles again, Simon, I don't know if you wanted to mention anything further on that.
Well, what I'd say is certainly non-plug-in hybrid, where you don't need the infrastructure, is absolutely something we can look at. Agree, and I'm sure Alice and Andrew and co can look at what's available in terms of non-plug-in hybrid. As soon as you get into plug-in, as I said earlier, we get into issues with the charging network. But yeah, non-plug-in and anything else that anybody's got ideas on how we can make those vehicles cleaner and greener, great, we're doing it. But absolutely, you've got people in that team who want to move all our bus fleet, and this links to the next item as well, decarbonise the bus network. So we're trying to do as much as we possibly can within the practicalities around the technologies that exist at the moment.
Yeah. Stephen, you want to come back?
I did, mainly because I understand the emphasis from the officers and Simon's comments there in terms of the intention to do so. But what does concern me are outright purchases of diesel vehicles. Now it's 3, and then it's going to be an outright purchase of the 4th. These are not cheap, rather than leasing them. And you yourself have said, technology is moving rapidly. We may differ about EV charging points, as I'm sure we will. But clearly there's more and more vehicles coming online. I'm just concerned, with a capital write-off and a shelf life of a vehicle like this, which is 7 years, as I understand it, is the likely expectation of a diesel vehicle of this nature. Why we are purchasing brand new vehicles that we have to retain for 7 years, or at least will have at least a shelf life for 7 years, rather than leasing for a year until an appropriate brand is available. Now, I appreciate there can be a lead in time, and which is caused by a number of different factors, and I won't mention the B word, of getting vehicles from outside the UK. So I can't understand why we're not leasing. Ironically, a large number of people are now leasing, you believe it, fully EV vehicles. Most of the leased vehicles you see on the road are leased vehicles for exactly that same reason. People realise actually in 2 years' time, the range instead of being 250 miles will probably be 350 miles, might at least 400. So I am concerned that we've committed one to purchase, and it wasn't in the report already, the fourth vehicle, and we're looking at purchasing a fifth vehicle, again a diesel. So I will amend the recommendation I put in here to take out the word in June 2022, just saying additional vehicles added to the fleet, be either hybrid, plug-ins, full EVs or alternative fuel vehicles. So I think the intention must be there. We are suing ourselves no service at all if we're purchasing outright diesel vehicles. I'm sorry if that sounds rather negative, but I'm just going to scan through on my phone, and there are full EV minibuses around. They're not Mercedes, some of them, but they clearly are around. I don't know what the lead-in time of purchasing them or indeed leasing them are, but I haven't got that far down. But there clearly are possibilities there. You know, in June next year, I'm a little bit disappointed that we've already committed to a full outright purchase of another diesel. That really does go against our sustainability agenda. I can understand the need to get this up and running with the government grant to start with, and therefore you really had no option but to do the Sprinter minibuses, get it up and running in the quickest time possible. But to perpetuate continuation using diesel is wrong.
Yeah, I'll pick up a couple of those, Stephen. I think one of the issues around leasing the purchase is the complications of use of capital and revenue. You can't use capital to lease, and that limits us. Whether those rules will change or not in the near future, I don't know. Completely agree about those vehicles being around. We've got one, and we've got an electric minibus in the adult care fleet, not the DRT, and that's been running as a trial for I think a year now, Andrew, which is why we know what the range constraints are. I would also agree, especially as a electric car owner, you do not want to buy electric vehicles. You want to lease them because of the value issue at the end, the depreciation. So it's complex, but I completely agree. Unless we can, I don't think we can reverse the order we've got in, but we can absolutely, for the fifth vehicle onwards, do our utmost to secure the greenest vehicle we can. Full EV, plug-in hybrid, non-plug-in hybrid, or alternative technology. The other thing, and Andrew can help me on this perhaps, for public transport, things like buses, minibuses, the life goes beyond the 7 years. Most operators will run those vehicles for longer. So right down on HGVs tend to be about 7 years, but on public, that's a minor point.
We'd expect Simon probably.
But actually makes it worse, Simon.
Sorry? Stephen, sorry.
Actually makes it worse than if it's longer than 7 years.
Well, it doesn't mean we'll keep them for 7 years, and you can always change. I mean, you know, some of the stuff we are looking at is what you can do with the existing fleet in terms of switching from diesel to electric. So, you know, it's all to play for. We will do our utmost to ensure, because you've got all the officers want to do the same thing, but it's just the practicality of trying to make it work.
Ironically, if I can just come back in there, ironically, you know, had this not been in North Herts but on the boundary with London, you may have been in a big issue with the charges that have been brought in by Mayor Khan, because these would have to be subject to charges if they cross that boundary, even by 1 millimetre.
Very likely, if it'd been in a more urban setting, with some of that charging infrastructure in place, we would have looked way more closely at full EV. You know, so as an example, and this is absolutely zero criticism of the DRT that's operating in Watford, in an urban area where mileage is less important, they're not running around as much, and the kind of EV chargers you need for these vehicles, which are very different from car chargers, may be in place, then we could look at it more seriously. I think, you know, for all of us to know, you know, once you start traveling long distances in EV vehicles, it becomes more challenging. But I completely agree that where it is practical, we will absolutely, at the earliest opportunity, start to source non-diesel vehicles.
Two issues come out of that. I have to stress the issue with capital and revenue is quite an important issue, Stephen. We got capital money from the DRT as it normally is, and therefore we could not use it for revenue leasing costs. Unfortunately, that was the case. The second issue on the sustainability, I think we're all sort of knocking against an open door here. I think we all want to see an EV fleet as soon as possible, but there are practical considerations. And perhaps I can amend a 3.2 just to not make the recommendation too specific, because I don't really want to tell officers you must go this route. I think we need officers to give the flexibility to go to the most appropriate route at the appropriate time. So if we could add on with officers' agreement as well, officers look for Hert's Link to develop a more sustainable vehicle fleet as soon as practical. Would that fit the bill?
It would at our end, Councillor Bibby, yeah.
Thank you, thank you. Would that be acceptable to you, Stephen?
No, I don't think it is, because I'm quite happy to amend what I put forward originally, which would then read that additional vehicles being added to the fleet. Obviously, you've already purchased the one for next June, be either hybrid or plug-in hybrids, full EV or alternative fuel vehicles. It's the same thing, but I think we need to be very clear. I mean, I'm not quite sure what more sustainable vehicles means. I think we need to be very specific. There are there are 4 different alternatives now: hybrids, plug-in hybrids, full EV or alternative fuels. And I would like to be very clear, those are the route. It's not just actually, it's made of sustainable materials. Well, doesn't fit the bill to me. It's the emissions is the issue here. It's the emissions.
I hear what you say, but I think we need to keep it as open as possible to give officers the flexibility. I mean, it could be manufacture of how they're manufactured, etc. It could be more sustainably manufactured vehicles. It could be hydrogen, it could be EV, it could be an EV, whatever. So if you want to vote on your amendment, which I would not support, we can do that, and then I'll put forward my amendment.
Yeah, why not, Phil? Go on.
Okay. Okay, Teresa, if you could. Right, okay, we're voting on Stephen's amendments. Thank you.
James Bond against.
It's fallen.
Thank you.
An agreement and 7 against.
Okay, thank you. Have you got the amended recommendation I said, Teresa, or do you want me to repeat it?
Can you repeat it, please?
Okay, it's 3.2. Officers look for Hert's Links to develop a more sustainable vehicle fleet as soon as practical, or practicable, whichever is the correct way to put it. So we could vote on that one, please.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question of your amendment?
You may.
Where you say sustainable, would you be willing to add and climate friendly?
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Chairman, but what does climate friendly mean?
More friendly to climate. I'm not going to argue the semantics with Paul. I'm happy for that to go in.
Yeah, I'm still on. I'm checking. I haven't muted myself. Yeah, it's the emission bits, because it's covering that aspect.
Yeah.
Trying to anyway.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. That's agreed unanimously. Thank you. We move on to item 5, bus service improvement plan. I think if we crack this one and then adjourn for lunch, if that's agreeable with everyone. So, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I have a few slides on this, which I'm going to try and rattle through as quickly as possible because I'm conscious of time. Also on the call is Matt Lale, Passenger Transport Manager, who's been leading on this as well for us. So I'm just going to get these slides up on screen. Can I just check, Chair, you can see that on screen?
Yeah.
Yep, again, I'll just make it bigger now. Thank you, everyone. So we've now published our bus service improvement plan for Hertfordshire. The BSIP, as they are known, was set as a requirement by the Department of Transport as part of the National Bus Strategy, and officers have had the summer to get this plan in shape. The BSIP is our plan for how we will grow patronage on the bus network. It is split into 4 main sections, with section 1 being the background and context of Hertfordshire as a county, section 2 the current bus offer, section 3 targets on key bus performance indicators, and section 4 the ambition and delivery. Today, as I'm conscious of time, I'm going to focus on section 4, but I appreciate the full BSIP has now been shared with members and is published on the Interlink Partnership website and will shortly be published on the Council website. Section 4 is the ambition and covers a number of key areas, namely more frequent bus services, more connected bus services, a lower emission network, a higher quality of passenger experience, simpler integrated ticketing, and investing in bus infrastructure. Officers over the summer conducted a detailed survey of Hertfordshire residents, and one of the key questions set was to prioritise the areas of ambition, as you can see here. It will likely be no surprise the top 5 areas involved more frequent services, services that cover more of the day, better information at bus stops, better ticketing and bus priority measures. This overall was a fantastic exercise to help us validate some of the thinking that is set out in section 4. The first key area of section 4 is the network, frequencies and how it connects together for the passenger. A key ambition and funding ask in our BSIP is related to enhanced frequencies, covering both the peaks, inter-peaks, but also evenings and weekends. As you can see on the map here, which is colour-coded, this shows bus frequencies, but by how long there would be a gap in service for passengers who are using those services. We are striving for a more connected network that links our key towns with more frequent services, and our aim is to improve these identified links you can see here on the right, and establish key higher frequency corridors between all our major towns. There's further detail in the main BSIP on those key links. The other key strand of the bus network, as I know we've just been discussing, apart from fixed bus routes, is demand responsive transport. Our aim is to expand the HeartsLinks brand to allow Hertfordshire to meet the ambition of a demand responsive network founded on social good purposes, rooted in the community, integrating with current providers to avoid duplication. This type of bus service may even be more valuable in other areas similar to North East Herts, and also weekend and evening gaps, where some of our bus network links are quite fractured. There's also a vital role for community transport on our own council fleet to integrate into the community further and provide seamless journeys rather than sometimes in isolation. And we've had some fantastic engagement sessions with the community transport sector over the summer. Obviously, the passenger experience is critical to our ambition. Completing the first part of the chain and ensuring a frequent, reliable service is vital, but how our passengers link into that chain is fundamental. To take these pictures you can see left to right, the first picture on the left is all about information for passengers, either before they leave the house, their school, college, workplace, or even shops and supermarkets. Our ambition is to ensure for those who have the means to check real-time information, they can wherever they are. For those less reliant on technology, we will ensure we continue to invest in printed timetables and other more traditional means of communication. The middle picture is the next part of the passenger journey, the bus stop shelter environment. Our ambition is to ensure a safe, welcoming place where passengers can wait for their bus. This may include different categories of shelters, all firmly rooted in the community and reflecting the needs of the passengers using them. The last picture on the right is an example of an on-bus improvement. Uno, one of our local operators, have begun installing audio-visual next stop announcement screens, which can help meet key accessibility ambitions. And our plans in the BSIP have these as a central ambition to roll out wider across the fleet. Investing in bus infrastructure on the road, always traditionally known as bus priority, is a key ask from the Department for Transport to reflect the ambition of local authorities. Due to the initial funding that came with the enhanced partnership formation in 2020, officers have been able to undertake 6 feasibility studies to identify schemes that could benefit buses, especially looking at hotspots that, if resolved, would improve reliability, such as the example here on the left. However, officers appreciate the high level of engagement that would be needed, and as such, these are currently being pitched as investment opportunities that would need to be fully worked through. The final key ambition section to cover is a lower emission bus network. Our ambition, subject to funding, is to reach the target of 50% of our bus network to be Euro 6 by 2025, which, whilst not fully electric, is a vital step in the right direction to reduce emissions, particularly nitrous oxide. Officers are also progressing a bid that has reached the second stage with the DFT for zero emission buses in the Stevenage area, which, if successful, would transform 30 buses to zero emission and remove around 1,700 tonnes of CO2 per year. Just quickly moving on from the main BSIP ambition, the other key thing to go with the BSIP is the passenger charter. The charter is a key piece of engagement work moving forward, and a draft version will be brought to the panel prior to sign-off in 2022. The charter forms a contract between passengers and operators to ensure a base of principles are met on every passenger journey. It's our intention to engage widely and ensure the charter has the attention and dedication it deserves to translate the ambition of the BSIP into the passenger journey each and every time. Finally, the numbers, as I'm sure everyone's interested in. This is a breakdown of the majority of the funding requests to match the ambition of the BSIP. We've submitted the BSIP and funding sheets to DFT, and it forms approximately £84 million over the next decade up to 2030, with a number of key deliverables to grow patronage. As you can see, the funding requests here match the themes in section 4 that I've just outlined. There is still some discussion we're having with the DFT to see if this can be increased or changed a little bit, as there are a couple of areas that we're looking to increase a bit late, but we are having those communications with DFT now. But we truly believe the ambition and funding would transform the network over the next decade and give a great sort of run into the heart, which has been looked at, as I appreciate, as a long-term solution. So in conclusion, I'm keen to emphasise that the BSIP is a live document. Officers are keen to listen to feedback, engage and ensure the content of the BSIP going forward links fully with our passenger charter and the needs of Hertfordshire residents. There are also loads of areas in the BSIP I've not had a chance to mention due to time, but myself, Matt and the team are really passionate about this, and we'll happily talk for hours. If you wish for more information after the panel, we can arrange that. So thank you for your time and happy to take any questions.
Just to evidence that Andrew could talk for hours on this, I asked him to foreshorten it in the interest of time for this one. There's just a couple of things, as you know, the bus users group in Stevenage emailed me on a few points. I think the one's appropriate here, just to highlight in case anyone else has seen it. There was a typo in 2.1.7, but that's been now rectified, I understand. But more significantly, about the use of technology and smartphones, etc. Great that we're moving in this direction, or we've already moved in this direction, but we do need to be cognizant of the for people in our community that don't have smartphones and aren't technology savvy. So I just wanted to make sure that we are actually providing adequately for those people.
It's a really good question, Councillor Bibby. I think two of the key things, especially around real-time information, is obviously ensuring we have that infrastructure at stops and shelters where possible for people who can't check apps or on their phone. But we're also looking at some innovative stuff, hopefully around town centres or shops and supermarkets where they could, for example, have an information screen in that setting where people who are passing or going to the bus station or wherever they can see that information. And obviously we'll continue our traditional means such as printed timetables and maps where we can and where we already do so, definitely.
Okay, thank you. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, totally support real-time information and, you know, expanding that, you know, more across, but it has to be reliable. If it says it's, you know, it's only 5 minutes away, okay, 5 minutes 30 I don't have a problem with, but 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes, you know, that's where people lose the thing. But totally, you know, there is areas of the county where we don't have that, so it is something that totally support that. The other thing that worried me with the map you put out is travel outside of the county. You know, in particular, you know, from where I am, you know, to Luton Airport, you know, and, you know, other places, you know, we need to look at that, you know, over to Stansted, which is on the border. You know, but it's trying to give an alternative transport, you know, for people, and DRT totally support, and I supported it as it got rolled out into the North Herts bit of our area. But, you know, I know it may be too early to get a, you know, start saying, well, can we do another one? We need, you know, more figures and more evidence, but you know, we do need to look. But going across county boundaries are just a line on a map. You know, people want to go to Cambridge, people want to go to Luton or to the airport, so we do need to have that in mind when we look at, you know, destinations, not just inward looking into the county.
It's a really good point, Councillor Clark, and I think we've obviously been linking in with neighbouring authorities in Essex and Central Bedfordshire, and Matt and the team have really good contacts in those authorities. The slight difference we have at the moment is, as you can appreciate, and I think I presented this in July, because we got our enhanced partnership in place as part of the Bus Services Act from 2017, before it was almost mandated by the DFT to authorities. All the other authorities, apart from West Midlands, are doing this in a slightly different way. They're putting their BSIP and then they're putting an enhanced partnership in place. So they're starting to put those partnerships in place with their local operators for next summer. So what we're hoping to do in that interim period is obviously work with the DFT and other neighbouring authorities to do exactly as you said and make sure our BSIP and enhanced partnership is linked to other operators and other neighbouring authorities to create that seamless journey for passengers cross boundary as well.
Annie.
Thank you. Just to build on what I said before, all of this is fantastic. The more data we have, the more we understand it. So well done, and thank you for that. And building on from what Paul just said, I can't remember where Paul lives. Sorry, Paul. But I talked before about work and leisure, but travel is absolutely right. And we know Luton Airport have I don't know too much about Stansted, but Luton Airport have a real active travel problem. I know they're trying to expand. They've got no solution for east-west travel. So whether we're the ones meant to be putting something like this on or whether they are, I think that's a really important conversation. And I don't think this much of this work covered schools. I know school transport. I know we mentioned before that the smaller buses might help in the future, but you'll know full well I bang on about what we've inherited with our schools, particularly our rural schools. And it's absolutely ridiculous that we've got so many different forms and structures. When Catherine Warrington School was developed, the great thing there, we could relook at the start times of schools and do some sensible joining of different school pupils on the same bus. And I don't know at what point we can do this work, but it's constantly in my post bag and probably from other rural councillors as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brewster. So again, I think, yeah, school transport per se didn't form part of the BSIP ambitions when requested by the DFT, but it is something that obviously Matt and myself and the team have accountability for. So we are looking at on a regular basis. We are doing a lot of work in that area, which again, I could probably talk about for hours because we're all passionate about it. But one of the things is looking at school provision, how that links into the commercial network, because obviously the best way is to link in with commercial operators where we can, to either purchase tickets on those routes for children where we can, and that links all together nicely. But we appreciate there's sometimes logistical issues in doing that. So there is other work going on in that area. And I think the key thing around this is, when we can boost those frequencies that we've outlined across the network and fill in those gaps, that also hopefully benefits schools and school transport, because those children that can use the commercial bus network or the public bus network can then access those services as well. And then we look further at those services we will put on like education routes specifically for different schools. So it is a piece of work we're progressing and trying to work on, but it didn't perhaps come across in the BSIP fully.
No, and I think just to add to the behaviour change, which is what we're seeking, I think if children have a successful bus experience when they're younger, they might be more likely to continue using buses.
Yeah, definitely agree on that point.
And the airport point?
Oh, excuse me, sorry.
All right.
So probably bring in Matt here as well, not to put you on the spot, Matt, but I know you've been chatting to some neighbouring authorities. I guess, again, that probably goes back to a conversation with neighbouring authorities to check in with what their plans are in their BSIPs and what they're looking to do with their ambition.
Yeah, it does. I think the good thing about how the DFT have gone about this is the fact that actually it brings local authorities in the neighbouring authorities closer to working on a level playing field. So when we're all putting our BSIPs together, when we're all doing enhanced partnerships, it is about kind of linking in to make sure and making sure that when we go over the cross boundary, when we are linking into airports of Luton or Stansted, that actually, we make sure that we kind of document it in terms of an enhanced partnership, and within the BSIP that we link in across. So I think in the next couple of stages for all of this will be to link across boundary with other local authorities about how we can do that, how we can do a better joined up approach to some of this. So I think, yeah, that's the key thing on all cross boundary areas. We need to kind of see how we can kind of mirror up. Obviously, we've got an enhanced partnership currently as we have at the moment, but how do we mirror up what we're doing in Hertfordshire with other local authorities as well? So yeah, so it brings a little bit more of a seamless transition across boundaries as well. So yeah, we will be doing that.
Can I just add there, Matthew, obviously it's worth a lot of money to Luton Airport to find a solution for this, because this could actually be the one thing that actually prevents their expansion, because government always wants to see what active travel, everything they've got there is north-south, as you probably realise. So whether the mass transit system that we're planning should continue through to the airport, perhaps is something that could be thought about.
I think on the point, Councillor Brewster, we'll try and, I must admit, I've not read Luton's yet. We are trying to keep an eye on other BSIPs to obviously see what the competition's like and if they're better than ours. But we will have a look at Luton's and see if there's any details in there and try and spark a conversation on that subject.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks.
Stephen.
Thank you. A couple of things. Obviously, it's an overarching report which goes with the 57 page document, which I have to honestly say I haven't read every single word of. Perhaps I was put off by the photo at the front page of you in a suit boarding a bus as your means of travel, Phil. Going back to the 1950s when people all wore suits when they travelled anywhere. Sorry, no pun intended or no offence intended there, Phil. But obviously the last paragraph, and I'll go to that first, mentions the Sustainable Hertfordshire impact assessment, etc. But what it doesn't have, and what I felt was a bit lacking, is that actually what does this contribute to our reduction on the greenhouse gases as part of that? So in terms of, if you put all of this in place, all the objectives you've got within this document in place, what net contribution does that give us to our climate change agenda and a sustainability agenda? And I have to say that's what I felt was missing from this report. I appreciate you're not able to answer that at this stage, and I appreciate I didn't raise it at the briefing, but when I read through it again and then looked at what was in a lot of good projects planned here, huge amount of potential inward investment required to achieve those. But if you assume you got all of that and you delivered all of this, what would it then give us as the outturn in terms of our climate changes, I think would be one of the issues. Then a little bit more parochial, page 47 mentions community shelters and bus shelters. There is a mention in here of solar panelled bus shelters. Now, fun enough, Three Rivers, where I have a portfolio not dissimilar to this, we've installed solar panelled 2 bus shelters as part of that. And obviously they vary in terms of that, in terms of what can and can't be done. I appreciate there's obviously an initial investment cost, but the mention in this part of it is actually for the screens as opposed to the lighting. So at this time of year, we need the lighting in the bus shelters, and we need that to have been dealt with in terms of daylight, up until 5 o'clock to light those. So, and it refers to specifically new shelters as opposed to retrofitting existing ones. And this is where I feel sometimes we don't fine, new things come along, we put new shelters in, they will meet the current spec, but we've got, I don't know how many bus shelters we've got across the county, but there must be tens of thousands potentially. We need to be looking at what of those we can retrofit and therefore reduce our carbon emissions, either with obviously, hopefully, real-time information screens if they have them or are going to go in. It obviously gives us the opportunity to retrofit, or at the very least light it. Now, because the other complication you've got, and I appreciate you've got this, you've got some bus shelters, I understand, maintained by town and district, town, parish, or indeed district or borough councils. It wasn't clear how that was going to be built, encompassed within this. Another issue, and I have raised by one of my colleagues in Wellingham and Hatfield, where he was told that there was no improvement for this particular bus stop, which was on a grass verge, had no hard standing, had a flag, had no shelter. Now, if we're going to encourage someone to use the bus at that particular location, we need to have the facilities next to it. Now, it may not always be possible to include a shelter because of the pavement depth and buildings and everything else, but you've got to make these areas user-friendly, shall we say. Otherwise, people, the first port of call, well, I'm not going to stand on a muddy grass bank to wait for a bus. You can forget that. And fourthly, and I appreciate this is part of the bus partnership issue, and probably I notice it more than some other members because of the town centre environment I represent. Buses idling at bus stops, catching up on time at this time of year, and particularly earlier this week, with their engines idling, and they've got no cut-off mechanism, and the driver sitting in there eating a sandwich, reading the paper, waiting the 10 minutes because they've either arrived too early or they need to catch up time to the timetable. I know the bus partnership is supposed to be dealing with it, but you require obviously an issue of people reporting that to you, going back to the operator, the operator getting on to the bus driver and so on. Certainly when people have approached individuals on this nature, you can imagine the sort of comments that they've had back. But are we pushing actually if the vehicle is stationary, it automatically cuts off, as happens in virtually most modern cars now? Because that can be retrofitted, I understand it, to older buses, and certainly the newer buses obviously do that. But it is a cause of CO2 emissions, clearly, and a cause of actual considerable concern for other people waiting at bus stops, particularly in urban areas, not waiting for the bus that's sitting there, waiting for the next bus, and they're having to breathe in normally diesel fumes. Now, I may be slightly off the agenda, and it may be covered in the 57 pages in that, but I think there's useful points there. We need to be pushing the boundaries on some of these. And I appreciate you have some issues, particularly in the south of the county, where you have Transport for London buses coming in. And I have to say they're a bit of a pain in the neck in some instances, using layover stops where they shouldn't be doing so in my neck of the woods, and actually having their engines running all the time. And even worse, they got loudspeaker announcements on the Transport for London buses, which is really annoying when they're parked outside residential properties. Okay, that's enough of me whinging. I mean, the emphasis and everything is very good, but could you pick up at least on some of those points? And I appreciate others you'll just have to go back and think about.
I'll just pick up on the first point, Andrew. As you know, Stephen, I will dress for the occasion, and I was giving a speech to launch the service to a car park full of dignitaries.
That's okay, Phil.
Okay, Andrew.
Thank you, Councillor Bibber. I wasn't going to address that point, to be honest. I'm glad you did. Just to try and take these points in turn, I think sort of sustainability, climate change, it's a good point. I think I haven't got a figure for you now. Obviously, it links back to how we're looking to decarbonise the bus network in general. I think as a slide I showed, and what you'll see in the BSIP is a 3-point plan focused on Euro 6 conversion and retrofitting of 100 vehicles of the fleet. The Zebra bid, zero emission bid we have for Stevenage, which we're hoping will be successful at DFT. And we appreciate we need to do more work to package that all together to form part of a more coherent plan going forward with some of these initiatives we're focused on to try and get to a figure, as well as taking into account the modal shift figure from cars and other things as well. So I'm hopeful we can get to a figure. Obviously, appreciate I don't have it at the moment. I think in terms of the Welling shelter you mentioned, I fully subscribe to, I think what the Community Shelters Project tried to set out in the BSIP is we want to go back to first principles a little bit to make sure shelters and infrastructures are reflective of the community they serve, and we get local resident feedback and input, and whether that's a rural setting or an urban. I appreciate colleagues much prefer sometimes a standardised approach to the same shelter we can always buy, but I think we're looking at where we can have different categories perhaps of different shelters and what we can use in their environment. And if you want to forward on those details of that specific one in Welling Hatfield, happy to have a look at that, because we do want to encourage obviously
a division, and I suggest he raise it with you about it not being DDA compliant and everything else. So I'm sure he'd have taken that offline and hopefully would have raised it. But is the issue of retrofitting to the existing shelters in terms of getting them off the network, shall we say?
No, it's a fair point. We are looking at both retrofitting and new shelters, because we do obviously have a rollout of shelters every year, which is either upgrading shelters that have been there in the past that don't quite meet accessibility standards. And we've been doing a lot of work over that in the last year, and I can probably bring something to panel next time to talk through that in a bit more detail with the work we're doing there. Just to bring in Matt quickly on the solar panel point, because I know, Matt, we have tried solar panels at a few locations. I think we retrofitted, didn't we?
Yes, we did. Yeah, we have started doing the retrofitting on current infrastructure that we have got there. So that is screens, that is lighting shelters as well. So yeah, we're not just looking at this as a new infrastructure. We're actually looking at what we've currently got on the network as a whole, and obviously looking at that. So we have already started that process.
Okay, that was clear in the document, I have to say. We need Matt pick up on that. Yeah.
No, that's a fair point, and I think part of this is the overall programme with shelters. Like you said, Councillor, there are thousands of shelters out there, some managed by HCC, others by town parish councils. So this is around bringing a programme together and looking at where we can improve things and what direction we're going on with that. But solar panels, other features of the shelters definitely feature in that, both retrofitting and new shelters and stops. Just on the buses idling point, I think definitely we can leverage the enhanced partnership we have with operators to look at that. I think the other key thing that comes to mind is earlier in the summer we took on Traffic Commissioner powers from locally. So what that does allow us to do is look at timetables when they're submitted, either alterations or new timetables, registrations, and we can look at possibly where there is significant layover time in those timetables, for example, and give comments back to operators. Hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, Matt. But that's one idea that springs to mind. The other is obviously data, and we have also included in the BSIP with some extra enforcement officers, I believe. We only have a small team, they can't be everywhere. So we do obviously look for feedback and data as well about where buses might be idling for long periods. And finally, I guess it's probably an open conversation with bus operators around driver benefits as well, in terms of it is a cold day. We don't want to put the driver in a position as well where they're really cold on their break or whatever, but that goes back to a wider conversation, I think, about the facilities for drivers across the network, which we can look into too. I don't know if you want to add anything onto that, Matt?
No, I think you pretty much covered it, Andrew. I think, like I say, we do have a small group of enforcement officers that we do focus on some of those areas where we get the most complaints. And the good thing is we do have a good relationship with our bus operators. So when we do get complaints like that and we do observe it, we do act upon it, and the operators act upon it as well. So we do have that. So like the more information we get, and like I say, we can monitor it as we go along. And the BSIP we have put in there for additional resources to be able to kind of focus in some of those areas again.
Yeah, and just on that, Chair, while Matthew's on, that small handful of complaints that I know I've had to escalate out to him, he's dealt with very well and pursued the bus operators in terms of the way they, including the recent one, I know it was a cross-boundary issue. So, thanks to officers for the work they do, given the small staffing levels they've got.
Thank you.
Thanks. No more hands. Just thank Matt and Andrew for the work you're doing on that. And I suspect the difficult stuff's yet to come to actually implement the plan with all the operators, and that's going to be no mean feat. So thanks for your efforts so far. If we could just vote to accept that report or note that report, please.
Yes, agree.
Hey, Bond, agreed.
Okay, that's agreed. Thank you very much. And on the bad news that winter has arrived, because I've just been advised that gritters are out tonight.
Yeah.
For the first time. Can we adjourn for lunch and reconvene in good time for start at 1 o'clock, please? Thank you. Welcome back, everyone, to this Highways and Transport Cabinet panel. Hope you had a good lunch and fit to go for item 6, which is the A602 Gunnelswood Road Junction Improvement Project. Is it Paul Rogers going to lead on this?
I can do if, yeah, I have to. So thank you, Chair. This report is about it's an update report on the Gunnelswood Road Junction Improvement Project. Section 4 of the report sets out the background to the scheme, the various plans and strategies that the scheme supports, like the Council's LTP4 delivery plan, Stevenage's local plan, and the Stevenage Town Investment Plan. Also in that section, it deals with the various business cases that have been submitted, and the funding that has been secured to date for the preparatory works. Section 5 sets out the objectives of the project, which are much wider than just highway benefits. So it's intended to improve safety, it's intended to reduce queue lengths at this junction, improve network reliability, and so on. But more than that, it's about unlocking development in the area and facilitating the creation of high quality jobs. And this area is home to some large businesses, notably GSK, Airbus, MDBA, Fujitsu, and so on. And it's also sort of, GSK have got ambitions for making Stevenage one of the largest centres in gene and cell therapy in Europe. So it would help all of those things. The report sets out the progress to date in terms of the technical work that's been undertaken, and also the discussions with GSK to secure the land needed to develop the scheme. Section 6 looks at the costs and funding of the scheme. Section 7 looks at the equalities impacts and mainly positive impacts for the scheme, but a bit of a few sort of minor issues during construction and so on, but they can be overcome through pedestrian and traffic management. And then Section 8 of the report includes a sustainable Hertfordshire impact assessment, and that looks at sort of some of the potential impacts of the scheme on wildlife and plants and so on, and some of the mitigations that can be taken to minimise those impacts. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Just to mention to panel, the local member Adam Mitchell is in favour of the scheme, although it's more wide-ranging than his division because it serves Stevenage, its employment area, the economy of Stevenage and Hertfordshire as a whole, because it's basically one of the major junctions through to the 602, and which serves a lot of Hertfordshire. So very important for the county and the county's economy and infrastructure improvements, particularly with, I'll keep on trying to call them black, so GSK expanding as we speak, and other bioscience centres planned for Stevenage, etc. So we have Paul Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few bits of clarification. I don't oppose the thing, but obviously the A1 is very close. National Highways, who run that, use this junction to come off. If they close 7 to 6, everything has to come off at 7 and go down through Nebworth and whatever. Similarly, if they close 7 to 8, everything's coming off and going up Gunnelswood Road. Has impact assessments been done on that? Also, are we encouraging traffic to attend the site on the A1 by road? You know, they come off southbound. I mean, there is the police post, which is not shown on the map, that is at the site. And there's also the access to Nebworth, which, I think in June next year, one of the Gallagher brothers is back, whereby there will be a concert there. One of the ways people access the concert is by foot, where they cross the roundabout, because there is pavement on the roundabout there, and go into the the bit was up for the hotel and then down, to Nebworth Park itself. And is there, last bit from me on the hit points, is there any take west of the A1 of land there for this in any way, shape or form? I can't see it in the thing, but I just want to seek your assurance.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Councillor. So,
side point, it would be fair to say it's a bit too soon for sort of network management involvement, etc. We've only just started developing the scheme, so to actually look at practicalities like that, I would say it's a bit too soon, Paul. But anyway, the other thoughts.
I flagged them so they're aware.
Yeah.
Rather than coming late to the show.
Yes. We are in discussion with National Highways and the network management team, but as Councillor Bibby says, it's quite early days, and there's a lot more sort of to be done in terms of design and so on before we firm up on sort of arrangements on site and so on. In terms of access to Nebworth, this scheme is sort of just to the east of the roundabout and sort of mainly the Gunnelswood Road A602 junction. So we're not proposing to do anything on that side, but we will raise your comments with National Highways. I think that covers your last 2 points.
Okay, thank you. We've got Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Yeah, I just wanted to flag up for members and officers, and specifically for new members, really, on this this scheme. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a much needed scheme to come forward for the area, for the to attract the bioscience industries and GSK, etc. But I mean, the funding for this part of the project, part of the funding, the LET money. The 1.1 million. I mean, that did come from, it was diverted from a project in my division on the A10, the southern roundabout in Buntingford, and that funding was diverted to this project. So I just really wanted to have that noted. So where there, what Stevenage's gain was Buntingford's loss, unfortunately, but there you are. That's the way it's gone forward. But in terms of a question, I just wondered, Paul, you might be able to help. I didn't see anything in the notes in the report about has there been any sort of conversation with the big employers like GSK, etc., about I mean, their staff travel, of course, majority of them come by car, hence the works on this roundabout. But I wonder if there's been any conversation to encourage them for sustainable transport measures. Perhaps, I don't know, a shuttle bus from the station, that sort of thing, or cycling from the station. Just wondered if there was anything. I didn't see it in the report.
No, I think Rupert Thacker has further knowledge on that. I'll invite him to come in.
Thank you.
Mute, Rupert.
Yeah, sorry, Paul. We've had lots of discussions with GSK around that, and I think something for members to be well aware of, that this isn't the silver bullet for Stevenage's transport network forever. What this does is create some additional capacity that supports and enables the reconfiguring of the wider network to support sustainable modes going forward, in line with the transport strategy that supports Stevenage's local plan and the growth and transport plan that's currently in development. So it gives you that headspace to be able to do a little bit more with the network and look at how we can enhance and support sustainable transport provision to then support growth beyond the short term. As part of that, yes, we've been having some really good discussions with GSK about how we can work with them, as well as other employers along the Gunnelswood corridor, to look at supporting the uptake of more sustainable journeys to and from the site. It does include potentially the provision of a sort of bus multimodal transport interchange within the curtilage of GSK's land, but right adjacent to the site that we're looking to make the improvements to. And that might enable some sort of combined
bus service that would then be able to run from the station through Gunnelswood and to the GSK site that all employers could work collaboratively to help fund. And that might tie in with some of the other ambitions that I know Stevenages has for sort of bus services to sort of loop through the town and link some of the key areas together. So we've been doing a lot with them around that, and those discussions are continuing. And just on the point that Paul made, Councillor Clark made around footway provision to Nebworth, I think that's something we've been flagging up consistently to Highways England, as they were, National Highways as they are now, through the work that they've been carrying out on the network to address those concerns, and certainly making sure that when the smart motorway scheme comes through, that foot and cycle access to Nebworth is something that's improved as part of any project. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your point quite, Jeff, but we are doing a lot of work around that, not only with GSK but with Stevenage and with other employers along the corridor.
Yeah, no, it's good to hear that. Yeah, thanks, Rupert.
I think it's fair to say the design of roundabout would cater for sustainable transport, would it not, Rupert? Yeah. We've got Stephen.
Yeah, thank you. I was looking through the appendix, particularly, which is a nice detailed appendix for the first time I've seen, on sustainable Hertfordshire impact assessment form. And I mean, I have to be honest with you, I don't know this particular site that well, but I've read through this and looked at the plans here. There's quite a lot here in terms of the impact on greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity. And ironically, I was just talking to you about bats, also refers to bats, Chair. What I couldn't see, and it may well be down the line and part and parcel of this, because it's now required, when we talk about construction management plans earlier, we're talking here about a construction environmental management plan on this one, which is another new take for me. But what I couldn't see is in any additional tree planting to offset potential CO2 emissions. Now, looking at the plans themselves, there appears to be, and I don't know, a substantial area of greenery between the escape road and the main road network, the A602 Broadway Hall. I think that's what it is on to the north there. There clearly are other areas there. There's some tree planting on the north side, or sorry, the south side of the A602, but none on the escape road. And it does seem to me, if we're putting in a new road network or parts of a new road network, what opportunities are there to increase biodiversity and to increase and to offset some of the additional carbon emissions that almost certainly will result on putting in new road network, which actually, whether we like it or not, always attracts additional traffic. I mean, all of us know, as soon as you put in additional lane on a motorway, we've had that in the past, or you put additional dual carriageway in, as soon as you put it in, it gets filled up with vehicles. Now, I appreciate down the line, hopefully all these will be EV vehicles, but that's clearly not going to be the case in the next 10 years or so. So could I have comments on that, or is it something that will be taken on board? I couldn't actually see anything in the impact assessment that related to any new tree planting. All mentioned about retaining existing foliage, but surely we should be trying to make some net gains here. That's my principal comments.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So on your question there, so there is currently a ribbon of trees between sort of outside of the GSK boundary, sort of parallel with the A602. So unfortunately, trees will have to be taken down to construct the improvement works, but the plan is that we will be putting replacement trees back in there, perhaps more trees, and the types of species and heights and so on will ought to be determined later on in the detailed design.
I suppose, coming back, Paul, on what you said, we're taking down trees and maybe replant them. It's not a question of maybe, as far as I'm concerned. No, we're taking trees down. They must be replanted. And what I'm looking for here, unless you can give a clear commitment, I want to move a recommendation that there will be a net gain in tree foliage on this as part of this scheme. It's no good just replacing what is going to come down.
Well, yes, we'll be replacing trees, and in line with the sustainable Hertfordshire strategy and so on, and looking to provide further trees.
I think it's fair to say that we agreed a recommendation a while ago that we would replace trees wherever possible.
Yeah.
So trees will be replaced wherever possible, but I would highlight also the Hertfordshire as tree strategy coming from the government's tree strategy, where overall in Hertfordshire we are increasing the tree coverage, so that will all be taken into account. We've got Annie now, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Paul. Paul, I'm just interested in the realistic potential for actually delivering the project, and I'm assuming that this gets it. I don't know whether we call it oven ready or shovel ready. I can't remember the term. I think shovel's nicer. For when funding becomes available. I think I read in there that the Stevenage Borough Council have put in a levelling up grant to cover all this work, is it? And I think the results meant to come out this month. And I don't know whether you've had any early signs on that. And if not, is it something that perhaps people like Glaxo, is it so attractive to them that they might consider some match funding for the project? Thank you.
Yes. So yes, one of the bids was for levelling up funding. That was specifically for construction monies. Unfortunately, it wasn't included in the tranche 1 list that sort of came out following last week's budget. And officers at Stevenage are sort of currently seeking clarification about the status of their bid. But it looks at the moment as though we'll have to sort of find other routes, other sources of funding.
It's very rude.
Yeah, Richard's just sent out an email, Annie, to say which bids have been successful.
Okay.
And unfortunately, they're not localised to such places as Stevenage. Whether we will get levelling up funding, I don't know. But I know that the money they have injected so far comes from the Towns Fund, which is completely separate.
Going
on to the second part of your question. Yeah, so yes, we GSK are obviously got ambitions for the area and so on, and we'll be exploring with them the opportunity of funding from them, or maybe them taking the scheme forward.
Yeah, splendid. I like the sound of that. Thank you.
Okay, no more. Oh yeah, Rena.
Thank you. Just on Councillor Giles Medhurst's comments, he also knows I'm very pro-tree, but I also understand, having 3 roundabouts cleared in my county division, the traffic management alone can be quite a challenge. If at least 1 tree is being planted, there must be other things that we could plant in terms of shrubs, flowers, and all the other kind of stuff, because just as it's very difficult for us to get there to prune and manage, it will be very difficult to upset the habitats of all the other residents of Hertfordshire. So it may be an opportunity for a different kind of approach to net gain biodiversity and ecologies.
Thanks, Rena. Got nothing more. Can we therefore we're noting the progress and the next steps, so if you could please agree to that, that'd be great. Thank you.
No, Mr. Chairman, I've just moved an amendment which I put in the chat for the purpose of Teresa. Can you see that, Chair?
No, I can't.
Right, add to the recommendation, officers seek additional tree/shrub planting at the site or elsewhere to offset CO2 emissions.
I think that's part of the day job, Stephen, so I can't really support that, sorry.
Well, I'm moving it.
Talked about this ad nauseum. You know exactly what we're doing in Hertfordshire.
I'm moving. I'm entitled to move it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, let's vote on that amendment, please, which I'm not supporting. Thank you.
Chairman, we don't know what the tree shrub planting is, so how do we know to do additional? I mean, that recommendation doesn't make sense.
Well, we're not going to accept it, so.
So much for your sustainability agenda.
You want to read whatever else is going on, Stephen? Keep up.
Well, the government U-turn, you mean? Yes.
No, keep up with what we're doing. Keep on telling you.
Not enough.
Jay Bond.
Okay, now could we please vote on the request to note in 3.1, please. Thank you.
Bond against.
James, you're against noting that recommendation?
Sorry, okay. I'm having a bit of trouble with that. I'm abstaining, sorry, apologies.
That's noted, and thank you. We move on to item 7, which is developing local transport plan 5. Is it? Oh, is it Trevor leading on this?
Yes, Chair. I'll take that as well. Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this paper is to seek approval to start work on a new local transport plan. I think probably right up front, I should say that we still believe the overall direction and ambition of LTP for the current local transport plan is still valid. So it's not about a radical overall of the overall direction, but there are a number of drivers why it's imperative to start work on a new local transport plan. The big driver is Department of Transport's decarbonising transport document, which came out in the summer, and one of the clear statements in there is that future funding for transport given to local authorities from central government will relate to how well we set out a decarbonising transport plan within our local transport plan. Clearly, we haven't got that at the moment, and we do need some changes to our overall policy around climate change, which at the moment is more about mitigation rather than a sort of an active one. So we need to look at the policy around that and the action plan, you know, if we could make sure we continue to get funding for local transport to deliver our sustainable transport aims. So that's the key driver for why we're suggesting we need to start work on a local transport plan and now. We are expecting further guidance on what that actually means soon, and the rumour is it will come out in spring, but we are expecting sometime in the next few months to have more detail about that, what that means. So that's the principal reason for suggesting we start work on one now, because it protects funding for our sustainable transport work. But there are other reasons, principally that we'll be able to pick up issues that we have developed since LTP4 that set out our overall agenda. Not least including the work around the bus service improvement plan, which we heard on earlier today, because the guidance in there says that should be embedded within the local transport plan, but also will be further on with clearer projects such as the Hart East-West Passenger Transport Link and other such projects which we've initiated since really LTP4 was developed. So there's an opportunity to embed those within the overall document. It will also give us the opportunity, I think, to look at the structure of the local transport plan in terms of relationship between the main document and supporting documents, because there may be opportunity to be more flexible in the way we update it in the future, rather than necessarily having to go for the big bang approach of reviewing the whole document. We may be more flexible in the future if we restructure within the next approach, so which gives us more flexibility how we deal with these issues in the future. So they're sort of the primary reasons for going forward, and obviously we'll pick up other areas that members may wish to review in the document as we move forward with the process. So primarily, there is a need in terms of funding, if nothing else, to actually review LTP5. Hence, we are seeking approval to start work on that as soon as possible. Open to any questions.
I know it's an issue for my colleagues that to do all this work every few years and then take 3 years to do it. It's very time consuming. We only have to sit here and agree it. You and the officers have to actually do the work and do all the consultations, etc. So a modular form, more flexible, amendable, dynamic document would be great. I mean, have you any private thoughts as to whether that would be possible, given all the legislation you have to protect yourself against?
Well, it's in terms of the form that there will be scope in the document, and certainly within the current plan, there is a policy wording, the PA policy wording, and a lot of sort of explanatory text around that. And it's the explanatory text which can get outdated as things move on. So there may be opportunities for moving that explanatory text into other supporting documents, which would mean we could update part of the explanatory text on a particular subject, for instance, without changing the main policy. So large chunks of it could stay the same. So obviously we'll explore that, do that. But yeah, there's clearly the potential possibility that we could make it more flexible, which I think would be useful, more dynamic response to changing circumstances and changing opportunities in the future, which would be positive.
Thanks. Paul.
Thank you. Remembering to unmute. You mentioned DFT's decarbonising agenda, but there's not a lot else in LPT4, and I am new to LPT4, so I don't know it intimately, so to speak. But about climate, our council's climate emergency and what we're doing on more fronts. Just to cite the carbon decarbonisation DFT agenda, there's a number of others things that have got to be mentioned. So I hope to see in LPT5 a lot more actions related to the climate improvement that we need to get on with.
Yes, it gives us opportunity. Yes, so as I said, the current sort of climate change policy in the local transport plan is more about how we need to adapt to the issues that climate change arise, rather than our positive response to reducing climate change or our impact on climate change. And obviously it's an opportunity to pick up on Sustainable Hertfordshire strategy and other similar documents. So that's obviously one area that we will clearly look at in the area, and it's clearly not as satisfactory as we'd like it at the moment.
Thank you. See no other hands, so can we go straight to the vote? We're recommending to panel on this one.
No, I'll put my hand up, Chair.
Okay, sorry, I've just seen it now.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah. I won't speak on something. Now the couple of, I do agree with you in terms of the officer time involved in this. Can I just be clear? The LTT4 at the moment covers our policies and aspirations up to 2031. So we have a new one. If we have LTP5 coming into play in 2024, what's the time frame for that to cover? I'm assuming is that just added on to the extra years? And I suppose the concern is, I expect it's respected with other transport authorities effectively, is how out of date our LTP4 is, which was obviously May 18, and certainly obviously predates current COP26, decarbonisation agenda, a lot of the EV strategies, and whether or not an interim update, those LTP4 plus, or whatever you want to call it, brings us up to a gear with what the government's coming out with. Because I mean, what is clear, and I may not like some of the government's agenda, but they often sort of throw X amount of money is available for Y project, and if we don't have a Y project on the books, we can't bid. And I'm already keen to get money out of the government for anything we can get, even if it's not my favourite projects for Hertfordshire. But anything we can secure is always good news for Hertfordshire residents. So is it a question of particularly updating potential funding streams for projects we're able to deliver as part of LTP5, even though we won't necessarily have LPT5 signed off for another 3 years? So, perhaps you could just elucidate a little bit more on those timeframes and how quickly you can bring forward any updates.
Yeah, certainly. On the time frame, I have to admit, haven't really given that thought yet. 2031, when we set that, was tying in with at the time when local planning authorities, local plans were generally their sort of time horizon at the time of LTP4 being developed. So that may be appropriate to time that process, not so we haven't actually given too much thought around that yet, but it's something we'll work through into the early stages. In terms of update, I mean, the LTP process has changed over the years. So original LTP process, the funding was very much related to the policies and the schemes we set out in the document. That has been taken away. So, there isn't a relationship between the schemes that are listed in LTP4 and potential funding, but that obviously seems to be coming back now through the next process. So we need to look at that. The key direction at the moment, obviously, is around decarbonising transport. Obviously, that's the key TFT focus. So it's important that we are up to speed with that as possible, so we can take advantage of any funding opportunities. So we are working on, and we'll come back to the panel soon on a decarbonising transport. I can never say that, decarbonising transport plan in advance of LTP5. It will feed into LTP5, but I think it's important we have an output from that earlier than that, so we can take advantage of. Almost certainly there will be funding opportunities, or certainly a bias towards schemes that can deliver against transport decarbonisation in the future. But we would expect that, given that the DFT's approach and that document. So we'll work on the decarbonisation transport plan as soon as possible. We won't wait for LTP5, but it'll be incorporated into LTP5 as and when. So we've got a maximum flexibility. We can take advantage of any funding opportunities as they come forward.
My own views on that, Trevor and Stephen, is that why call it LTP5? It should be our LTP, and basically to have a time frame on it, 2031, it could mean that we wouldn't be actually reviewing it to 2028, and it's totally out of date as soon as you write it. So therefore, a dynamic document with no time limit, but just called LTP4 as amended, or whatever you like to say, would be much more relevant, I would have thought, in today's market, because things are changing so quickly.
On this, I can agree with you, Phil. I totally agree. Something that comes along the next government announcement in a couple of months' time, and we've got a document that's out of date.
Yeah. So certainly we will. At the moment, there's a process for adopting it. To make change, we'd need to go through a full process in its current format. So we'll definitely look at whether we can be much more flexible in its structure to allow us to do that and just update parts of it as appropriate in the future. So that's definitely part of the work programme to look at early on to see how that can be structured.
I mean, on this one, Phil, if I may interject again, if we can streamline some of this in terms of not having to go through huge amount of processes on updating. I'm sure that would benefit all of us, and particularly our residents.
Absolutely, yeah. and I would like to know why it has to go through cabinet every few years. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway, we do have to recommend this goes to cabinet on this occasion. So
you're pleased to know there's no amendments. So
yeah. So if you could vote on that one, please.
Bond 4.
That's agreed unanimously, thank you. So we now go on to Trevor again for item 8, Sustainable Travel Towns.
Thank you, Chair. And just to ensure members aware, Sustainable Travel Towns are one of the key programmes within current local transport plan to try and get more sustainable transport, active transport and public transport. So it's one of our key programmes. And just to recap, we agreed a provisional programme of 3 towns, Stevenage, Letchworth and Royston, in December 2020, and since then we've been working with the relevant district and borough and the promoters or the bidders of the schemes to work that out and to ensure that particular districts and boroughs were fully supportive of the concepts there, and there were opportunities to deliver sustainable transport in those areas, and producing an outline plan. And the purpose of the outline plan is to get the town into a full programme, at which stage we will go much further out in terms of public engagement, setting up joint member processes, etc. But at the moment we kept it very into a small number of people because we don't want to set heads running until we understand whether we can take things forward or not. Stevenage Sustainable Travel Town, if you recall, came to the September meeting of this panel where it was approved to go through the process. So we are currently working with Stevenage to take that forward. We've now worked with North Herts District Council, Letchworth Garden City Heritage Foundation and Royston Town Council for their bids to be in a position where we think we can now recommend that Letchworth and Royston Sustainable Travel Towns are entered into the full programme. So in which case we'll then widen out the consultation process and engagement process. So primarily you have the document there, you have the outline plans, which set out support from the districts, set out initial set of schemes, and the infrastructure schemes in there are ones that have been approved through other processes or draft up as the case of the growth and transport plan, and some generic behaviour change schemes. There's a lot more work to do on the detailed behaviour change scheme, working with local groups if the schemes are agreed into the full programme. So the documents are there for you to look at, but primarily, hopefully, it's about getting into the full programme. So I shall leave it there and open to any questions, Chair.
Thanks, Trevor. Just for the record, Tina Bartois of Letchworth, she's supportive of her town obviously being included. We've got a question from Paul.
Yeah, just like to have my voice, to the support, for the schemes. Obviously, as a North Herts District Councillor, Letchworth and Royston I know very well. I see the Letchworth scheme, builds on the Greenway for cycling. It would be nice to see within the Royston plan a bit more, connectivity with the cycleways or building cycleways, especially with the industrial estate on the edge, getting people out there, but also around the town and interlinking towns and villages. Yes, we have the demand responsive transport scheme, which is good and links Royston, but it would also be nice for people to be able to access those areas by bike as well. Perhaps some of the villages further to the south might be a bit of a bike ride too much, although I know there's some people who go on a lot longer bike rides, but I'd like to see, in the Royston one, a lot more, cycling. I know North Herts currently doesn't have a transport officer, as he's gone to work on the tube trains on the Isle of Wight. So all best luck to Daniel, but fully supportive of the thing. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to come back on that, yes, so obviously cycling is a key mode of transport that we want to promote for sustainable travel towns, alongside walking and buses and trains. There is, I'm sure you're aware, that there's a current LC WIP, local cycle and walking infrastructure plan being developed for North Herts, which will cover both towns. So that, and I believe that should be sort of come out in the new year sometime. That will help inform some of the infrastructure requirements around cycling in Royston and Letchworth and around, and we'll take that, but we'll also look if there are any other further gaps as well. So we'll use that, we use what's existing through the Growth Transport Plan, we will look what's in the LC WIP, and then we'll do local consultation about, well, okay, are there any further gaps here that would be useful to local people or would encourage further cycling within the town and, say, between towns, especially in Royston.
Yeah, well, it's between the towns, you know, between Royston and Letchworth, you've got places like Weston, Sandon, Arbury, Ashwell, you know, and it's linking those, you know, Ashwell Station, it's linking those up. And even outside the district, you've got Melbourne, Bassingbourne, you know, to the north of Royston, Henlow, Arlesey, you know, I know it's outside our purview, but linking up with other councils, you know, talking to them to see what content connectivity we can get. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. Yes. And yeah, I think it was mentioned earlier on in this panel, boundaries are there, but yeah, we're looking at transport routes and needs rather than political administration boundaries in the area.
There's no other questions or no other hands, so we can go to the recommendation, please, that we include Letchworth and Royston in the STT programme.
Bond agreed.
Thank you. That was agreed unanimously. Item 9. There's no other part 1 business, and there's no other part. There's no part 2 business. So thank you all for your attendance and contributions. Thank you to Michelle, our online or media guru, and Teresa for keeping us in order. Thank you very much. See you next time.
Thank you. Thank you, chair officers. Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.